Good deal.
Hello, everybody. This is the Comanche Zoom for Thursday, July 16th. The main attraction is an interview time with John Bryerton from the Piper Comanche Museum, Piper Museum, not Comanche, Piper Museum, where the Comanches were born. So we'll go with that when we get around to it about 7:30. Until then, it's a free for all. Talk as you wish. Click yourself so you have a mic and go for it.
Yep. And our opening person is a very special guest, and that is Chris Fenger, who is, believe it or not, a Bonanza pilot, just as one of our opening guys was an AME with 50 years experience, a Mooney pilot. And Chris Fenger is an extraordinary expertise on the Hindenburg, so we're pretty excited to have both people coming tonight.
I'm being distracted here because there's 3 aircraft, count them, 3 in the pattern doing touch and goes.
Social distancing.
No, they're all Cessnas though, they don't count.
Oh, well. So are people flying are Comanches flying anywhere here, these guys? All you guys that are on? By the way, hello everybody, I'm CJ.
Well, I haven't been flying much lately.
Yeah, that's hailing us all. By the way, Chris Fenger, greetings. I can see you just joined. So everybody joins muted. So you'll need to find your unmute button in order to be able to participate.
Here we go. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear. And well, we've got you. Pete, you've got Chris's slide deck, yeah?
That is what?
Do you have Chris's PowerPoint presentation as ready to go? He sent it out earlier.
I don't think so.
Okay, let me just check my email and make sure it got forwarded to you. Chris, do you see your green screen share button? It's normally bottom center.
Yes, I do.
All righty. Well, welcome and thank you so much for being here this evening. We are really excited to have you.
I just enabled the screen share so you can load it up.
Brilliant. So have you screen shared with Zoom prior, Chris?
I have not. I have been on Zoom meetings where someone else was sharing, but I have never done it.
Gotcha. So this is the perfect opportunity. What you need to do, Pete, do you want to walk Chris through the process?
Yeah, you'll click the screen share button and it will show you a screen of your open things. Click on the one that you want to share, and then down toward the lower right-hand corner, there's a button that says share. And it will come up and replace the main stuff on the screen.
Okay.
And then when you're all done, up toward the top, there's a stop share.
Got it.
And once you're sharing, if it's a PowerPoint like that, you should be able to use your up-down arrows to move back and forth. No sweat.
All right, just like I normally would.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Do you want to give it a try?
Sure.
There it is.
Perfect.
That'll work.
That
Masterful.
works fine. Yep. Bingo.
I'm going to stop share.
Yep.
And when it's time, we'll share again.
Okay.
Well, welcome to the wonderful world of Comanche pilots.
Yes, indeed. I have some very good friends who are Comanche drivers.
Yep, and we even have some good friends who are Bonanza and Baron drivers.
Oh,
so
good.
We're pleased to have you. Yeah, we used to have a Bonanza that would come to our fly-ins a lot. Really, really great people. So it is thrilling. And as you were probably hearing, one of our very first Comanche Zooms was kicked off by a Mooney and Sonics driving AME with 50 years of seniority. So, and he just had an exciting day when it turns out that the secondary starter on his Sonics, which was secured with screws and not safety wired because that wasn't spec for that home-built Sonics, backed out just enough that his the plastic cover started to melt, filled his cockpit with smoke, acrid smoke, and forced him to have to start looking around because he wasn't over anything with the runway and put it down on a road.
Oh,
So
lucky guy.
he is a very, very, very lucky guy. If you can imagine trying to breathe burning plastic while looking for a place to put your sonics down.
Not so much.
Yeah, he's a former F-16 flight surgeon, and I'm wondering if all that emergency training
I bet
may
it
have helped
did.
him keep his cool.
I bet it did.
Yeah. Pete, can you do a quick check on something? Normally, Les takes care of this, but I don't think he had a chance to. Can you just confirm that the meeting title is correct?
That I'm not even sure how to do.
Okay, we'll get him to take care of it when he comes in. Otherwise, we may have a bunch of confused people saying, it says autopilot. Why are we here talking history? Well, welcome everybody to the Comanche Zoom that we're really excited about with a lot of history happening. This is CJ Stump, and Pete Morse is here with me. We're waiting for two of our other hosts to come in, but the key thing here is that tonight we have kind of a double feature with Chris Fenger talking about the Hindenburg, and then John Bryerton, head of the Piper Aviation Museum, talking about the history of, it'll be somewhat about the Piper Comanche. He was an engineer at Piper during the Comanche era. I misled people a little bit in my write-up when I read it carefully, in that his primary focus was on the Navajo and Cheyenne, and as he put it, when I got here in '63 as a part-timer, there were 5,200 Comanches outside the Lockhaven factory. I nearly fell over. And he said the B model and C model were happening. He worked a little bit on those, but the Comanche type certificate was done in the 50s. It was, I think, 56. And so he said, unfortunately, the people who worked on our airplane are now pretty much gone. And what we have are people who watched it developing into its later models, like John. Anyway, so as usual, welcome, and may as well just start a round robin and say who you are, where you are, or rather what you fly and where you're from. I'm CJ. I'm usually from Vermont, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island, and I fly either a 260B or a Comanche 180 temporarily. Anybody else, just jump in.
Well, I guess I can go. I'm Carl Talkington. I was the mid-stage chief for a while, and I fly a 260B, and we moved from Colorado back down to Austin, where we kind of started to be closer to the family. And it's kind of been a little bit slow here since the virus took over. Got through the annual in June, and I'm still trying to get a little time to take it up and make sure everything's running good, but I expect it is. So great airplane.
For sure. And Carly, you made a lot of contributions to Comanche safety and technology, or technical stuff, and we still use that and are grateful for it.
Really? I didn't know I did anything.
You did, Jeff. I see your stuff when I go back to records looking for things. So thank you for what you've done for us all.
Well,
For the time you put in.
I jumped in and spout off, but I have a CFII, so I did a lot of Comanche checkouts, and then I got my ANP, mostly working on Comanches, and then my IA. So it's been a long career with Comanches, and I think it's a great airplane. The sad news is, I'm afraid it's going to way outlive me. I'm running out of time.
Oh dear. Well, we're glad you're here tonight, and I think in a way they're part of our legacy to our future, is to pass along birds that'll be still flying 50 years from now when we're all gone.
I'm sure this one will.
Yeah, yours is gorgeous.
Somebody runs it into the ground.
Well, we're working on that. That's why the safety is so important. Get our maintenance people knowledgeable and get our pilots fabulous. Not that we aren't fabulous already, but more fabulous. And that's part of why I keep running into your contributions, Carl. As an AMPIA, CFII, and Comanches, it's people like you that made us go.
Yeah, it was a really good organization.
Yeah.
Comanche Society.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everybody else, just jump into the silence, just like you were on ATC. Say who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
Ron, you got to unmute.
Go ahead.
Looks like Ron's muted.
Yeah. Well, there we go.
I traded it in for a turbo supercharged Comanche 400, which I've had for 48 years.
Wow.
I still have it and I'm still flying it, even though I'll be 89 next month.
Way to go.
Well,
It's one of-
Welcome. And I missed where you're from, Ron.
There's probably only about 8 of the turbo supercharged 400s in the world.
You know what? Stephen Osborne is trying to, in Kansas, is trying to, sorry, Lonnie and Lauren. Let me just tell Ron this. Ron, where are you?
I'm in Corona Del Mar, California.
Okay, Stephen Osborne is trying to rescue a turbocharged 400 right now in Kansas. He's got a straight 400, and then he's got this other 400 that he's very excited about with a stall kit. So can I put you guys in touch?
Sure. Mine was one of the original 6 that were used to certify this turbo supercharging on the 400.
Wow, I didn't even know we did a turbo supercharge. Lonnie and Lauren, welcome.
wow.
See ya.
Didn't know that either.
Tell us who you are. Well, I know you, but who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
Hi, this is Lonnie and Lauren, and we fly Comanche 1960 Comanche 180, and out of Charlotte or Rock Hill, South Carolina, and glad to be part of this group.
Good to see you.
I want to also add, I don't know if you guys have seen the new Microsoft simulator. We are not game people, and I've never played a sim, but if you've seen it, it is absolutely amazing. Real-time weather, real-time traffic, and the graphics. I just bought a supercomputer to run this thing, and I got a 49-inch monitor, and I got a really nice yoke to go with it. I'm just like all in with this thing, and Lauren is so excited she wants to fly it. So it's going to be amazing. It's coming out August 18th.
Oh, sweet. Lonnie and Lauren, are you guys using the A2A Simulations Comanche 250 sim on that?
No.
We're not familiar with it.
Okay, they are doing a group buy special for us Comanche drivers. I will bring that up at the next Zoom. It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's really, really realistic. Okay, sorry to interrupt
Awesome.
everybody. Please jump in when you can.
If I might, it was nice to find somebody in my age group still flying Comanches.
Hi, Bill.
Yep, I've been flying Marne since 1975. It's a steam model, and I live in North Carolina, Newbern, and we're developing a Comanche neighborhood here in the very near future, the next week or two. What it is, it's really a bunch of Comanche-oriented people in North Carolina that want to get together and keep contact.
Well, Bill, we are Lonnie and Lauren. We're in Charlotte, so we're all in. We would love to meet at Pick and Pig or wherever, and we're all in.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm supposed to be pushing this program called the Get Acquainted program for the Northeast Tribe. So I'm really starting to push it down here in North Carolina. It would be good, if you're interested in getting together or getting to know the people, please somehow or other, if you can get me your information or your telephone number, I'll call you up and we'll follow up on it.
How do we get in touch with you?
Well, it'll come up in a little while how you can get in touch with me, but if you give me your telephone number now, I'll be more than happy to follow
You
up.
can actually, you can put it into the chat window. You direct it to Bill.
All right, we will do that.
Please follow up, because we've got people up in the Raleigh area now, and now we got people in Charlotte, And there's a whole, I think the last count, there was about 25 Comanche people in North Carolina. And it was really, it's really good to get to know who they are,
Absolutely.
especially if you want to borrow a jack to jack the plane up or what have you, or you want to find out who's a good avionics guy or what have you.
Yeah.
Well, that's excellent, Bill. We just sent you a private message.
Okay.
That'll pop up in your chat.
Yeah.
And Bill Stinson just called me from earlier, which is, he's in North Carolina with another twin, not Zach Mabry. There's two Zachs that are both like under 30 in North Carolina with twin Comanches. And he's going to be flying up your way as well. So everybody just jump into a quiet spot, say who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
I think I'm going to jump in right here to do my commercial for a short time about some of the stuff that's going on. And I'm sharing here. This is the Comanche website, the Northeast Tribe website. Up here at the top, you can see it says northeastcomanche.org. That's how you get there. On the website, things to point out is our fly-in schedule. We actually do have real, genuine fly-ins. In fact, we're doing one this Sunday over at Katama on Martha's Vineyard. And we did one a little while back at the Resnick Airport in Ellenville, New York. So far, the rest of them have not been canceled unless they're official ones, like the Oshkosh and Rochester Airport and ICS Convention. Also, on the website, I gotta go back to it, is the list of Comanche Zoom things. These are the ones that are coming up. The one we're doing right there tonight is the LHV Birthplace of Comanche. As you can see, there's a bunch more that are scheduled, but we haven't yet gotten it down as to which one is going to be when. You'll be the first to know. So in fact, I might be the first one to know, then you will know. We'll go with that. But also on this page, like for instance, the one on STEC 3100, over here, this link will get you to the page that has the Zoom recordings on it. Gives you a description of what that particular one was about. And then by clicking on either of these links here, you get to hear what was going on that night. Another thing's going on the tribe documents page, thing we're going to really push right now is the election process. There's an application already out there for the Northeast Comanche Tribe officer. If you want to try and be an officer in the Northeast Comanche Tribe, fill this out and send it in. Hopefully, we'll get some new people because, to be honest, the four of us are getting a little tired of doing the job. And then there's also on this page a membership application, which we're trying to, build our database of members. You don't have to live in the Northeast area. You just want to be a member of the tribe, go for it. Fill it in. I've done this before, so if I do this, you can see the kind of stuff that goes on there. And it's pretty simple. And down at the bottom on all these forms, you click send, and it will go to me, who I'm the web guy. So it goes to me, and I will get it to where it belongs. And then that's about it on that one. I'm going to stop that share. And I think yeah, we wanted to do this one too. The public service announcements. As Bill was talking about, the Comanche GAP or Get Acquainted program. We're trying not to call it GAP because people don't know what it is. For those who are looking, here's Bill's phone number and his email address right here. Tonight is the Piper Lockhaven Museum with John Bryerton, and they were having some problems in terms of keeping open because their big tenant, the guy that rents the big office area in the building, has left since they all work at home, and they are, getting hired up for funds to keep the thing going. That was what paid to keep the building going. We're also working on a Zoom swap coordinator. The idea is to you know, if you have things that you want to sell or things that you're looking for, we'll have a swap meet basically at the end of each session. And then if we go to, there we go. These are things we're working on, development and production. This is the what we're doing tonight is the Piper Museum swap meet. Right now, Les Thomas is kind of the focus point for that to gather stuff together. And then the documents program, we had a Zoom thing on that. He's looking for documents related to the 30 and 39 twins. And he's also looking for the original Piper handbooks, the little, you know, the small brochure that came with the Comanches back in the beginning. And we're starting to collect any repair tricks and tips, particularly if they are a 337 or an SDP kind of thing. And One Red Jeep at Gmail is where Matt is located to send him stuff like that. And that will take care of the advertisements.
And now anybody who's just joined can jump in and just say who you are, where you're from, and what you fly. Any quiet spot.
John McGowan. I'm out in Silicon Valley, California, and we have a 59 Comanche 180 that we've owned for 42 years.
Way to go. You've almost got Bill beat.
Well, my neighbor across the taxiway has owned his 180 for 50 years, so I'm 8 years behind him already.
This is what makes the Comanche great. The fact that people bought them and loved them for half a century. It's so cool.
I'm Vic Jones. I'm in Southern California, based out of Fullerton. I've got a 1959 250, and I'm a new owner. I just bought it 18 years ago.
Yeah, that's a newbie. Yeah, they're amazing airplanes. Really love it.
And I need to introduce you guys to Denny Haskins, who's had his since I think it's 50 years now. I apologize, whoever I stepped on. Go for it.
Jim Brown. I have a 59 Comanche 180, and I'm in Detroit.
Hello, I'm Trevor Laundew with a 1969 PA30 from the UK, Peterborough.
Cool.
Cool. It's very cool here. Yeah.
Hi, this is Dave Shaver. I just got my 65 260 back today from the bird strike repair. So I'm back in the air after 3 months.
I'm Jim Witt. I've got a 67 260B. I'm based outside of Denver, Colorado.
Dave Byers. I'm out of Columbus, Indiana. Got a PA-24 180, and it's a 1958.
Thanks, Feldman. 1959 250 that I bought the first piece of in 1985. We operate out of Lincoln, Illinois, Kilo Alpha, Alpha, Alpha.
Ernie James, 1965 260, Yucca Valley, outside Palm Springs, California.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Stephen Osborne from Topeka, Kansas, and I own and fly a 64 Comanche 400, and I have a 65 Turbo 400 project sitting in a hangar trying to figure out what to do with it. So if anyone has any great ideas, I could use them. But I love my 400, and I get it back next week from a full panel upgrade. Pretty excited about that.
As far as the turbo is concerned, win the lottery would be my best advice. Kristen Winter, PA-30, outside of Minneapolis.
Mike Ellis, 1960 Comanche 250, outside of Moline, Illinois.
Don Pitt, 1966 260B, Lovington, New Mexico.
I'm John Westerfield from Coleman, Alabama. Got a C model that I enjoy flying.
And then if you just remute, and then anybody else can jump into a quiet space and say who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
This is Bill Donald in Albuquerque. I flew today. I have a 1962 Comanche 250. Upgraded all the avionics about 1.5 years ago, and I'm loving it.
Hey, this is Kevin Kirtley. I don't have a camera going, but I'm on my second Comanche now. This one's a 1962 250. I keep it down in Greenville, South Carolina. I fly it up and down the coast all the time. Lots of fun.
Yeah, we haven't flown much while our alternator's on the fritz, but right now there's just nowhere to go. We had so many trips planned like everybody else, and so we're really looking forward to getting back to some kind of a normalcy.
My name is Dave Durkin. I have a 1960 250. I'm in Las Vegas in northern Michigan.
Yeah, Lauren lived in Vegas for 12 years.
Hi, it's Chris Algar here from Canada. Just signed in. So looking forward to the evening. I'm just outside Toronto.
Yeah, someday they'll open the border so you can join us in person, huh?
Well, I was going to go down to that fly-in, but
yeah,
no way.
Yep.
I go down for a day's fly-in. I'm going to quarantine for 14 days.
What do you
Well,
fly,
they won't even
Chris?
let me go right now. They won't let me cross the border.
Right now,
you fly,
all of
Chris?
the New England states are on the not so bad list. Put it that way. You can travel back and forth between the states without having to do the 14 days, unless you're going to stay, and then you have to do the 14.
Oh, okay.
What do you fly, Chris?
A Comanche 180.
Nice.
1960. The other thing up here, unfortunately, is I want to go down to Quebec, to Gas Bay, fishing, and I can't even go down there without the quarantine into the next province.
Oh, geez. And what Chris is being a little cagey about is he just flew that stock 180 around the world 1.5 times. So welcome to an Earth Rounder. Thanks for being here, Chris.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Steve Flaherty. I'm based out of, I live in El Paso, based out of the aircraft out of New Mexico. Currently coming to you from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where I'm temporarily working for a little bit. I fly a PA-24 260C. It's been down for a little bit. I'm actually installing some of the new GI 275s. in it, which has been a real flog. I finally got it flying again, and I think my starter shot today. To get power but no spin, so it's a good time to be away from the airplane and working, I guess.
Actually, real quick, if you need a ride down to Martha's Vineyard this weekend, just drop a note into the chat window and we'll hook you up with a Comanche going your way.
I'll be visiting family in Situate, actually, right on Situate Harbor.
Oh, you are? Gosh, you could pop over without us. But yeah, we'll be on the Vineyard this weekend, and if you need a seat, we have a fly share program. Sorry, everybody. Keep going.
Hey, Steve, I'm in Albuquerque. Where do you base your plane in New Mexico?
It's out of Santa Teresa, Doña Ana Airport, Kilo Delta November Alpha.
I know it well. I've flown in there.
Yeah, fun little airport.
Have you gone to the museum?
You know, I've lived in town for 6 years and I haven't been there yet.
Yeah, that's a must.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, it's that magical hour. If you want to do the intros, I'm going to mute everybody, and then I would suggest everybody go to speaker view so you can see who's talking. So right now, I'm going to mute everybody. Wow, that was quick.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you, Chris. Go for it.
All right, you can see the presentation, the Hindenburg there under its first flight in March of 1936. So thank you for having me. Thank you, CJ, and others who set this up. Particularly want to thank my friend Ray Fay, who has been a friend for 20 years. And I think Ray was born in a Comanche. He just loves the airplane. But he's the one who reached out to me to set this up. So this presentation is about a brief history of the rigid airship, but the most famous one was the Hindenburg. And we've all seen the footage of its demise at Lakehurst in 1937. But the rigid airship really had quite a rich history leading up to that. And that event proved to be the death knell for the rigid airship. But unbeknownst to many, they were the first scheduled airliners, strategic bombers, regularly scheduled transatlantic aerial passenger service, as well as flying aircraft carriers, believe it or not. Why can't I advance my presentation? Here we go. All right, so it all started with this guy, Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, born in 1838. In 1863, he was sent to the United States as a military observer of the US Civil War. He was given a pass signed by Abraham Lincoln, allowed him to tour the fronts and the battlefields. And after he did that, he wanted to explore the Western frontier. And he found himself in St. Paul, Minneapolis. And when he was there, he had the opportunity to take a ride in a hot air balloon. At the time, it was made buoyant by something called coal gas. But that was his first experience. And he came away mesmerized by that. He went back to Germany and pondered all the military applications of aerial observation, bombardment, etc., travel. And 26 years later, after he retired, he built his first airship, the LZ-1, Luftschiff Zeppelin 1. Flew on July 1st of 1900 at his home in Friedrichshafen, Germany on Lake Constance, also known as the Bodensee. It was a rather rickety craft, but it was his dream. And if you look at that, I don't know if you can see this, this big V shape here, but this is a wire. And here is a weight. And to lower the nose, they shifted the weight, and to raise the nose or drop the stern, they shifted the weight aft. They didn't know a lot about control surfaces at the time. This particular ship made all of 3 flights, totaling 2 hours and 1 minute before it was broken up. But his real dream was to sell these to the military. And he didn't have a lot of success with that. For the next 10 years, he had some triumphs, he had some failures, but he couldn't convince the military to buy an airship. So he built 4 ships for passenger service. This one here is the Victoria Luise, and he stationed them all around Germany and gave people joy rides for about $50 a piece. And they would go up and look at the countryside for, you know, a couple, 2 or 3 hours. Before World War I broke out, they flew 10,200 passengers successfully without any harm. And these were all filled with hydrogen, by the way. And here's a picture of the Victoria Luise in her hangar. Before we go further, I thought I'd share how these airships were built. They share a lot of commonality. There was a lot of development over the years, but the basic structures of all the airships are largely the same. There are a series of concentric rings made of duralumin, very lightweight metal, and these concentric rings were tied together with longitudinal girders. And you can see here, here are the rings. This is a main ring that has this reinforcement on it. And these are intermediate rings. And they're tied together with these longitudinal girders. This picture on the right is actually the Graf Zeppelin being built in 1927 in Friedrichshafen. You can see the man, the workman there working on it. He's on a main ring, and they've just started to put the outer cover on it on the top. Once they get the framework built, it's then covered with cotton fabric. The airship on the left is the USS Macon. This picture was taken in probably 1932. The framework is largely complete, and they have begun to cover it. The photograph on the right is the Hindenburg being covered, and you can see that the sections of fabric are pre-cut, pre-made. They're laced to the girders, and then a patch is glued over that to present to the slipstream. The picture here in the middle is at the Zeppelin Museum in Friedrichshafen, Germany, which I encourage you to go to if you ever get the chance. They have replicated a section of the Hindenburg. And this shows the framework. It is covered in a corrosion-resistant lacquer, excuse me. And then you can see the outer cover here, right? And so this picture shows what it looks like before the installation of the gas cells. This happens to be the Graf Zeppelin. The framework is complete. The outer cover is complete. You can see the rings, the main rings, the intermediate rings, the longitudinals, the keel here along the bottom. And then this is called an axial walkway. It's suspended from the top of the ship, and it allows the crew to walk through the center of the ship to inspect gas cells. And the Graf Zeppelin, for example, had 16 separate gas cells inside of it. So here's a bit about the gas cells. This again is the USS Akron, sister ship of the Macon. These are test fittings of the gas cells while the ship was under construction. On the right is the Hindenburg with one of its gas cells being test installed. You can see these cables here, this netting, and this kept the gas cells in place, kept them from chafing against each other, transferred the loads from the bag to the framework so it could lift the bulk of the ship. And you can see here's that axial walkway going through the center. Down here, we'll talk a little bit later, but down here are the passenger quarters, actually built into the hull of the ship. So starting in the early 1920s, they decided to paint these ships silver to reflect the sun. Because what would happen is they get out in the sun and heat up. And when the gas heats up, it expands. And when it expands, it gives you more lift, which is great, but it also stretches the gas cell inside. And the last thing you want is for one of these gas cells to explode or to rupture. And so they had automatic valves that if the gas got to a certain pressure, it would automatically blow off gas before it exploded or did any structural damage to the ship. And so starting with the LZ-126, later the Los Angeles, they painted them silver. This airship on the right is the sister ship of the Hindenburg, the Graf Zeppelin II. But you can see the silver being applied here. They were powered by these engine nacelles that hung off the side. Obviously, you don't want to have an internal combustion engine inside of a hydrogen-filled airship. So the car on the left is from the Graf Zeppelin. And the Graf had 550 horsepower engines, Maybach engines. Interestingly enough, they were powered with the equivalent of propane, a gas. One of the challenges with flying an airship is as you burn fuel, it becomes lighter, and it's harder to keep the airship in trim. And so by the time the Graf Zeppelin came around in 1927, the Germans had developed this blue gas, and the bottom of the airship had their own separate gas cells of this blue gas. And you can imagine that it was a flying bomb between the hydrogen and the propane. But that's how they powered the Graf Zeppelin. The Hindenburg on the right used diesel engines, 1,320 horsepower diesel engines. The airship carried 65 tons of diesel fuel, and it cruised at about 76 miles an hour. It consumed just under 1,200 pounds an hour of diesel fuel. There were 4 of these engines. They could go up to about 1,450 horsepower for maximum performance, but only for a limited amount of time. And in cruise, they were generally developing about 900 horsepower. You can see here in the front are louvers that could be opened and closed. There's a line here. They could be open and closed for cooling the engine in flight. And here's an interior view of one of the port engines on the Hindenburg. A very noisy place to be stationed, for sure. There was a telegraph here to get commands from the forward gondola for forward, for idle, for different speed settings, etc. Here's what I find interesting. When your shift changed, this is what you did. You walked out on this 6-inch wide platform with these bars to hold on to. Can you just imagine doing that out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean with a 76-mile-an-hour slipstream to get to your duty station? Took courage that I don't think I have. So putting it all together, this is a World War I Zeppelin, a German Navy Zeppelin called the L32. But I use this graphic so you can see how all that construction and design comes together. You can see the rings here. You can see the longitudinals. These are main rings. The gas cells are between the main rings. You can see the fabric and obviously the engine gondolas. The forward gondola here where the captain and commander resided. And here's another view of the same airship. Again, you can see the rings, the gas cells, the engines, and here are the fuel tanks that served each of the gondolas. So now let's jump to World War I. And the German government finally saw the value of airships, their range, their endurance, their payload capability, and started to invest in Zeppelin airships. And this is probably one of the most famous, and that certainly this series is the L-30, the first of the Super Zeppelins. Came out in the spring of 1916, about 2 million cubic feet of capacity. They carry about 5 tons of bombs. These airships regularly raided England. They also served as scouts for the Navy, and in the Battle of Jutland played a critical role in finding the British fleet well in advance of the surface ships, finding them. And here's a picture taken from that forward gondola looking backwards to the rear gondola, and obviously headed to England for a raid. Here's a well-known painting among airship aficionados, showing the forward gondola of one of these airships. You can see the elevator man here, a rudder man here, the commander here with his charts, observers looking for British fighters. The English did not like being bombed on their island home. It was quite a breach to them. The Zeppelins had pretty much free reign in the first couple of years of the war, but by the fall of 1916, with the introduction of incendiary bullets and high-altitude engines, most notably in the BE-2C, they were able to get up to the Zeppelins and shoot them down. And so the tide turned against the Zeppelins as I said, in the fall of 1916. But they did have an important role in scouting for the Navy as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. So now the war ends, and the Allies have taken a pretty significant interest in Germany's use of the airship. The range, the endurance, the payload, the speed, all eclipsed where the airplane was at that time. And so the US Navy in particular got involved. The Zeppelin Company built this airship and started passenger service, reintroduced passenger service right after the war. This is the Bodensee, one of the, what I think one of the most elegant designs that came out of the Zeppelin works. Also one of the fastest airships ever, rigid airships ever built at 82 miles an hour. But the Allies determined that she was built with war materials and therefore was seized along with her sister ship, the Nordstern. And the Bodensee was given to Italy, the Nordstern was given to France. If you ever get to Le Bourget in the museum there, which is fabulous, you can see the nose of the Nordstern, the Bodensee's sister ship. And so by now the Zeppelin Company is on its heels. It's about to go bankrupt. And Dr. Echner, Hugo Echner, who was running the company after Count Zeppelin died in March of 1917, made the bold move of proposing that Germany build an airship for the United States. And that would keep the Zeppelin Company afloat and promote his rigid airships. So that's exactly what happened. This is the LZ-126 and was delivered to the US Navy in October of 1924 across the Atlantic. Was the most successful of the Navy airships. You can see some of the data here, 33 tons of useful lift, 5 400 horsepower engines, 50-knot cruise, was dismantled in 1939. But this ship really kept the Zeppelin Company alive in the early 1920s. With that success, the Zeppelin Company undertook a subscription campaign appealing to German citizens to donate to build an airship and appealing to their nationalistic pride. And so contributions poured in, and as a result, they were able to build the Graf Zeppelin. This was the most successful airship in history. It was built in 1928, had its first flight, flew around the world in 1929, sponsored by the Hearst publishing empire, made headlines every place it went. You can see almost 800 feet long, 96 tons of lift, those 5 engines we talked about earlier, could carry 20 passengers. Over the years, carried over 13,000 passengers just on this airship, and she flew over 1 million miles. She was finally dismantled in the early stages of World War II in May of 1940. And here's a couple pictures of the forward gondola. This is where the passengers stayed. This is the bridge, if you will. This bumper here is actually a rubber bag, a pneumatic bag filled with air, lined with bamboo shoots, and then covered in canvas. And this cushioned the ship as it came down to kind of break its landing. And here are 2 pictures from inside of that gondola. The picture on the left is the forward bridge with the elevator man on the left, the rudderman in the center, and it looks like Captain Ernst Lehmann here on the right. And this is a lounge inside that gondola. Behind here were the berths where people slept. But this is where people congregated, had their meals, chatted, watched the scenery go by, etc. And this last picture of the Graf Zeppelin, I thought you'd find of interest. This was taken in August of 1929. The ship had just come in from Tokyo, Japan on its round the world flight. And this piece of land where it is now, where it is sitting, is now LAX. And if you've ever seen that futuristic restaurant, that white futuristic restaurant, it sits right about here. A little piece of trivia if you're ever at LAX. So now let's talk about the Navy's use of rigid airships as aircraft carriers. Goodyear partnered with the Zeppelin Company in the early 1920s, got access to their patents and some of their key design people with the idea of building airships in the United States. And they contracted with the US Navy to build 2 airships. The Navy was so impressed with how Germany used their airships in World War I as scouts for the fleet. This is in the days before radar. And here's one of those ships. This is the USS Macon. Both the Akron and the Macon were virtually identical, save for a few small things here and there. As you can see, almost 800 feet long, almost 80 tons of lift. But interestingly enough, they could carry 4 airplanes in their belly. And that's what I want to show you next. Oh, before I get to that, I put this slide in to show you the scale of these things. They were enormous. This is the first of the 2 ships, the Akron, USS Akron. This is at Lakehurst. This hangar is still there. You can visit it, you can tour it. This is the Los Angeles, which we talked about a little while ago. But you can just get a feel for the enormity of these airships from this photograph. So now to the aircraft carrier part of it. This is the Macon. You can see its hangar doors are open in the belly here, and an airplane has either just been retrieved or is about to launch. And they flew these F-9C Sparrowhawk fighters, about a 25-foot wingspan, 430 horsepower Wright R975 engine. They hooked on with these this hook apparatus and a trapeze, and that trapeze would then be lifted into the ship. And the airplanes could be put on a trolley and dollied around the belly of the airship. And here they are lining up to get on the trapeze. This picture was taken over New Jersey. Another picture of them about to hook on. You can see another trapeze back here that if someone was having fuel problems while the other ones were coming on, they could hook on here and shut down. And then when it was their turn, start up again, drop off, and come back over to the main trapeze and get lifted into the ship. So now we get to the Hindenburg. As I said, probably the most famous or infamous of the rigid airships. It was a result of roughly 36 years of advancement in airships. It was 804 feet long, contained just over 7 million cubic feet of hydrogen at a range of 8,000 miles at 76 miles an hour. It had 256 tons of useful lift, could carry 36 passengers. It was considered the SST of the day. It could cross the Atlantic in anywhere from 48 to 62 hours, compared to an ocean liner that took 6 days. So if you wanted to get over to Europe or from Europe over to the States quickly, you took the Hindenburg. The fare was about $400, was $400 each way, $720 round trip. Whoops. And here's the Hindenburg on its first flight, March 4th of 1936. A couple things I want to point out here. First is there's no name. This was considered an ill omen by the crew. And there was some talk of whether it should be called the Hitler or the Hindenburg. But the name had not yet been put on it, even though the paintings and the drawings were all complete. Second thing I want to point out are the Olympic rings. The 1936 Olympics were held in Berlin, and so both the Hindenburg and the Graf Zeppelin sported these rings, and both of them flew over the stadium where Jesse Owens and so many others competed. And the third thing I want to point out is this date, March 4th, 1936. 2 days later, on March 6th of 1936, the Supermarine Spitfire, famous for the Battle of Britain, took its first flight. So that gives you some context of the times. This is the shed that the Hindenburg was built in. This is the shed the Graf Zeppelin was built in. And this was built so they could build a larger airship. And this slide gives you some context. This is one of those early passenger airships, the Victoria Luis, that I talked about early in the presentation. Count Zeppelin built 4 of and stationed them around the country. The Bodensee, built right after World War II, could go 86 miles an hour, 82 miles an hour, I'm sorry. And then the Graf Zeppelin. And you can see the passenger quarters in the Graf Zeppelin here, the 5 engines. And then the Hindenburg was only 31 feet longer than the Graf Zeppelin, but contained almost twice the gas volume and 1.5 times the useful lift as a result of its larger girth. And that larger girth also gave it better strength against torsional loads. Here's the Hindenburg arriving at Lakehurst for the first time in 1936. It made, I believe, 18 crossings of the Atlantic in the 1936 season. It took quite a ground crew to bring the airship down. Any of these airships took several hundred men to pull down. But again, this is arriving at Lakehurst. And here it is at Lakehurst. There's the hangar. Again, it's still there, attached to the mooring mast in May of 1936, almost a year to the day from its fiery demise. And here it is inside the hangar at Lakehurst, next to a Navy blimp. Here's a cutaway view of the Hindenburg, an artist's rendition. You can see the axial walkway here, the longitudinal girders, the rings, cutaway, the gondolas, and here are the passenger quarters here on 2 decks, and actually the forward gondola where it was commanded from. I thought I'd show you a sample loading of the Hindenburg. This thing weighed 130 tons empty. Passenger and crew, 10 tons, and their baggage, 10 tons. Fuel, anywhere from 60 to 65 tons. They also carried water ballast to help keep the ship in equilibrium. They carried 15 tons of that. 4 tons of oil, freight and mail of a couple of tons, provisions, food, liquor, etc. 3 tons, miscellaneous parts, bedding, 4 tons. So a total payload of 107 tons. And the gas could lift 242 tons, so it had to overcome a total of 237 with roughly 5 tons of lift left over. They never filled the bags all the way up because as the ship went up and air got less dense, the bags would fill up. And so they averaged at about 242 tons of lift. But if they filled the gas bags all the way up, it could lift 256 tons. This is in the hangar at Frankfurt, about to take off for the United States, an evening takeoff, which they often did, so they could time their arrivals to during the day in New Jersey. You can see the passengers up here getting settled into their quarters, friends and family seeing them off. And here's a cutaway view of the interior. You can see the passenger cabins here, the staterooms, and a promenade deck along these windows on either side, a dining area over here, writing room. This is actually an aluminum piano to save weight, and just areas to lounge in. Down on B deck, interestingly enough, there was a smoking room. And you got to think, smoking on the Hindenburg, really? But it was a pressurized room. It had a rotating door, and so it had positive pressure inside. and you were allowed to smoke in there. There were no no open flames. Everything was electrically done, much like a car cigarette lighter. And here's some pictures of the dining area. These are early AGFA photos, excuse me. So very spacious, very luxurious. Certainly nothing like the sardine cans that we fly in now, but quite nice. This is the reading and writing room. And this is a typical berth. 2 bunks, they generally folded up to provide more room. Folding sink or writing table. Very lightweight, very thin walls, basically fabric covered walls. Shared a bathroom in the center aisle, again to save weight. We were rationed water, again being weight conscious. And then here's a picture, one of the many pictures we've all seen. The Hindenburg was coming into Lakehurst for its first flight of the 1937 season. And it had been delayed by storms over New Jersey. Flew through a small cell, which airships regularly did, but picked up a positive charge. Interestingly enough, it made a very tight turn on its approach to the mooring site. And it's believed that one of the bracing wires in the back, adjacent to cell 4, just forward of the forward fins, came loose, slashed that gas cell, and had free hydrogen, let hydrogen loose. Hydrogen by itself does not burn, but when it is mixed with the 92% hydrogen and 8% oxygen, then it becomes flammable. And they dropped the mooring lines, and exactly 4 minutes later, the fire started. And test after test has been conducted of the potential and the difference in electrical potential, and all the calculations come out to the fact that it takes 4 minutes to let off a charge. There's also theories of sabotage, but they have never been proven. So there were 97 people aboard, 36 passengers, 61 crew. Believe it or not, 62 survived, a 64% survival rate, 23 passengers and 39 crew. 1 member of the ground crew died when the ship came down on him. The sands were very wet and heavy from the rain of the day. And so it was hard for the Navy men on the ground to get away. And one of them unfortunately perished. But this spelled the end for the rigid airship. At the time this happened, the Graf Zeppelin was on its way back from Rio de Janeiro. They also flew the South American legs. And a gentleman by the name of Hans von Schiller was in command of the Graf Zeppelin. He got a telegraph message informing him of the fire, and did not tell the passengers until they got back to Germany. The commander of this ship, the Hindenburg, on this flight was a guy named Max Proust, a longtime veteran of the Zeppelin Company. He survived, died, I believe, in the late 1950s, but he was badly burned. You can see the passenger quarters here. A lot of people jumped, and there's a steward, a young 15-year-old steward named Werner Franz, who had a ballast tank burst over him and got saturated with water, and that saved his life. So here's Lakehurst today. I live not far away in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. I keep my Bonanza at Trenton, New Jersey, and regularly fly over to the shore. And the Class D airspace over Lakehurst is closed on the weekends, so you can very easily transit it. So here is the hangar number 1, still there, right? This is the area here where the airships, the rigid airships, generally had their operations. These 2 hangars here were built in World War II for anti-submarine blimps. This hangar is a balloon hangar put up in the 1920s. The Hindenburg came down right through here. And if you go visit Lakehurst, there's a museum over here in this far side. You can get tours of the hangar. A good friend of mine gives them. There's also a marker out here where the forward gondola first touched the ground. But this is where it came down. The airship came around like this, made this very tight turn right here. And this is where we think that wire broke and ruptured the gas cell and let the hydrogen out. And then she was coming around here and dropped her mooring lines right about here. And it was, as I said, 4 minutes later that the fire happened. So here's a little bit about me. I took an interest in these airships as a young kid in the 1960s. I built my first airship model. I built model airplanes like crazy. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to build an airship? I saw in a book. And so I scaled up the plans and came up with a design and built my first airship. I still have that airship, by the way. In 1973, I went to Germany. I met Hans von Schiller, the captain of the Graf Zeppelin, the fellow I told you about who got the telegraph of the Hindenburg's demise and didn't tell the passengers until he got to Germany. He was second in command of the L-30, that World War I Super Zeppelin I showed you. And he also commanded the sister ship of the Hindenburg, the Graf Zeppelin II. He was a fascinating man, and I got to spend a day with him in Germany. In July of 2000, on the 100th anniversary of Count Zeppelin's first flight, the Zeppelin company christened its first airship since the Hindenburg era. It was known as the NT107 for new technology. As it happened, the chief pilot was a good friend of mine. We became friends in the 70s. He pursued a career as an airship pilot and got in touch with me and invited my family and I over to attend the christening. And here are a couple of my models. This is the L-31, sister ship of the L-30. I built this back in the 1970s. Here's my model of the USS Akron I built about 20 years ago. Hangs in my study in Pennsylvania. This is my model of the Bodensee, built just a few years ago. A piece of fabric from the ship. And then here's my model of the Hindenburg, which I built when I was 16 in 1971. I have two pieces of fabric from the ship and a piece of metal. It was given to me by an airship veteran in Germany. And here I am with my Bonanza. And if you're interested in any follow-up, here's some resources for you. Any book written by Douglas Robinson about airships, you should buy. He is considered the dean of airship historians. His book, The Zeppelin in Combat, is a must-read for people like me, and really tells the story very thoroughly. He worked together with a guy named Harold Dick, who was Goodyear's representative at the Zeppelin Company during the Hindenburg era, and the two of them wrote a book called The Graf Zeppelin and Hindenburg. So I won't go through all of these. There's a very good website called airships.net, put together by my friend Dan Grossman. The Navy Lakehurst Historical Society that has a museum at Lakehurst has a website. You can find it there. And then again, the museum in Friedrichshafen, Germany is just outstanding. They have one of the gondolas from the Graf Zeppelin there, and you can see that and a lot of other relics from the era. And then lastly, this is a model built by my good friend John Melberg. These pictures were taken at the Milwaukee Airport, Mitchell Field. Last year, they needed the space, and so they decommissioned this gallery. And this Graf Zeppelin model, this is Graf Zeppelin II now, the sister ship of the Hindenburg. This model is being hoisted at the EA Museum this week at Oshkosh. And John did a few repairs to it. I was able to help him out with some of those repairs. But EAA was very glad to get this model. And so the next time you're at Oshkosh and you're in the museum, you'll get to see John's work of art. And with that, thank you. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
If you want to talk, ask a question, you need to unmute yourself and then back on, just like get a mic button.
Yep. And I'll
Hi,
go ahead and
this is-
start. Oh, go ahead.
Hi, this is Lauren and Lonnie. My question is, since they're so draggy, what was their best cruising altitude? And if they're going west, how do they even make any progress at 76 miles per hour? It seems like westerly winds, they may not even move.
Yep, that's a very good question, Lonnie. They generally flew, in the passenger era, they flew at 1,500 to 2,000 feet, pretty low by our standards. And that was because of the pressures. As they went higher, the bags expanded, right? In World War I, they went up to, some of the airships went up to 20, 25,000 feet. But one thing that the Zeppelin company pioneered, and these airships pioneered, was pressure flying. So they would get on the backside of a low and ride that low across the Atlantic. And there were times when they made very slow progress. The Graf Zeppelin on its first flight encountered a line squall and ran into headwinds after they got through the front, northwesterly winds. Didn't think they were going to make it to Lakehurst, called the US Navy to send ships out for them. They ultimately made it, but that was a real concern. But the notion of pressure flying, they did an awful lot of. And they didn't go from a VOR to a VOR. They looked at they got soundings, they got weather reports over the telegraph, and created a weather chart on board the ship, and then made their course accordingly. They were not always on time. The Hindenburg was 12 hours late on the night it burned, for example.
Did the U.S. Navy ever fly the Macon or the Los Angeles with helium?
Yes, so the United States, that's a great question, something I probably should have brought up. The U.S. had a monopoly on helium, and helium was mined down in Fort Worth, Texas, and it was very expensive and valuable. When the Los Angeles arrived in October of 1924, the hydrogen was removed, the airship was hung from the rafters at Lakehurst, and it was inflated with helium because obviously the US didn't want fire. Helium does not lift as much as hydrogen. Hydrogen, it's about 92% the lifting power of hydrogen. The Hindenburg was actually designed for helium, but with the rise of Hitler, Roosevelt and his administration, although they liked Dr. Eckner a lot and the Zeppelin company a lot, they were afraid of Hitler's potential military use of airship. And so they would not give the Zeppelin company helium. But all the US airships flew with helium.
So they lost about 10% of their lift, basically?
Roughly, yep, exactly.
I had a
I'm sorry?
Well, I had a question. I've always wondered how these things performed when they got into weather. I'm sure they ran into thunderstorms across the ocean. How did that go?
Well, there's a couple of episodes. As I mentioned, the Graf Zeppelin in 1927 on its first crossing ran into a line squall. It took a very severe pitch up and pitch down, broke a lot of glass, shook a few of the passengers, leveled right out, and was solid as a rock the rest of the way. That said, in that incident, it lost some fabric off of its port fin, and so they had to tie that off mid-ocean. So that was one example. The other is the USS Shenandoah, the first US Navy airship. It was built by the US Navy. It was modeled after several World War I Zeppelins that had come down and were copied. It ran into a line squall over Ava, Ohio on September 3rd of 1925. Because it was so long, it got caught between up and down drafts, and it got literally sheared in half and came apart. So these airships did not fly through a thunderstorm. They flew under them, they flew around them, but they gave them a lot of respect, but didn't fly through them per se.
In World War I, did the British use helium, or did they get helium? In World War I, did the British use helium, or did they use hydrogen as well?
Oh, they used hydrogen as well, and they also used hydrogen in their the rigid airships, most notably the R100 and the R101, and the R101 burned in October of 1930 in France as a result, with a large loss of life.
And did anyone ever experiment with a mix using a hybrid, a mix of helium and hydrogen to make it less volatile?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the Zeppelin company did. As they were designing the Hindenburg, they carried out a number of tests with a hydrogen bag inside of a helium bag to insulate the hydrogen, still get advantage of the lift, but insulate it from fire. But the United States wouldn't give them helium, and so that never came to pass.
The transatlantic flight ticket cost $400. I assume that was
36
dollars. What would that be today? Do you know?
Oh boy, you know, that's a great question. I haven't done the math. My guess would probably be about $8,000 or $10,000. But we should do that math.
Okay.
I don't know.
And a second item, something that you don't know about. I happen to have a piece, several pieces of the wreckage of the first Zeppelin shot down over World War I.
Oh, really?
My father was 9 years old then, and my grandfather was an American, and my grandmother on that side was a Canadian, and they worked for he worked for the International Harvester there, and after it was shot down, he took my father along with the rest of London out to where the wreckage was. It was surrounded by bobbies, linked arm in arm. My father got away from his grandmother, dove under the Zeppelin, drove under the bobbies linked because they had their arms apart. He just went between their legs, ran up and got a couple of pieces of wreckage and came back. And I have it.
Good for you. Treasure that. Treasure that. Any other questions?
Was there pushback on the U.S. government after the Hindenburg disaster due to its decision to not allow the export of helium for passenger applications?
No, there really wasn't. Hitler and the Nazis were not well liked, and so there really wasn't a pushback. Naturally, the Zeppelin company was disappointed, but I'm not aware of any public outcry as a result. Anything else?
So how many airships are flying in the U.S. today? And I assume they still use them for sports photography. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's only a handful flying now, Lonnie. That NT107 I showed you from 2000, that was a result of the Goodyear-Zeppelin partnership that was put together back in the 1920s. And so Goodyear has been building blimps, and a blimp, by the way, is just a gas bag that has a shape to it. It has no internal structure like the rigid airships did. So if you take the gas out of a blimp, it just collapses, right? The NT107 is a hybrid. It has a triangular frame inside of it, but the shape is held by the pressure in the bag. And Goodyear has just moved away from their own airships and are now flying the NT107s. And I believe they have 3 or 4 of them flying now. So they're used for publicity. They're used over stadiums. And there's only probably half a dozen blimps flying now.
Chris, I don't know where I read it or heard it, and I'm probably mistaken, but correct me if I'm wrong. I heard at some point that the Hindenburg, because it was silver, something in that paint was extremely flammable in addition to the hydrogen that aided in that fire.
That's true. That is a theory that the components of the paint were highly flammable, and they were. But that theory has been discredited pretty resoundingly now. A book was written about it about 20 years ago, I believe. But as I said, that's been discredited now. When it first came out, there was a lot of talk about it.
And oh, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, a question I have is with the, I know the ones that were making Airship Industries in North Carolina,
right?
Kind of ingenious. They would inflate an airbag that would contract the gas bag and make it sink, as I understand it.
Correct.
Am I correct that way they didn't? I have two questions really. They didn't have to vent helium, and then number two, the United States government has shut down the helium reserve up by Amarillo. You know, how short is the world supply of helium? Short of blowing off a hydrogen bomb to make it.
I don't keep track of the inventory of helium, but you're right. It is in very short supply. I've seen that in the news. And you're also right about blimps. They have inside that bag not only helium, but they have what's called a ballon, a small balloon that is full of air. And they have one in front of the gondola and one in back. And they can inflate or deflate those interior bags to A, maintain the pressure, and B, add weight or shift weight, because air is heavier than helium. So if you want to go down, you would pump air into the forward ballon inside the bag and take air out of the back ballon, right? And that way you maintain the pressure on the bag, but shift weight forward so it's easier to go down.
Chris, I have a question with regards to navigation. I presume they used celestial whenever possible. Was there some sort of opening on the top of the ship to allow them to get the good celestial readings?
Yes, there were, and they did that routinely. They also dropped smoke bombs from the gondola to get drift readings, and they worked out mathematical formulas for their altitude, how long it took to drop it, but also calculating the breeze versus their course and what the wind was as a result. The Hindenburg had radio direction finding, which didn't work out over the middle of the Atlantic, but as it got closer to shore, then they could use that.
And this is CJ. I hate to do this because this is absolutely amazing. And so let me ask Chris this. So we have two things going on tonight, and John Bryerton is here with us, and he's as fascinated as I am about this. But if we're going to cover both topics, Chris, is this something you might consider coming back and doing again? Because we have a lot of interest still.
Sure.
And this was amazing.
I'd be happy to. There's all kinds of other stories and histories associated with airships. You know, the whole World War I era, for example.
Yep.
You know, we could spend a whole night on that alone. So yeah, I'd be happy to.
Well,
I understand scheduling constraints, so please don't worry.
This is recorded, and so this recording will be at northeastcomanche.org. And if you click on the Comanche Zooms link, then we'll be able to review this. But Chris, I can tell you for sure that I think there's enough people here who still have questions and are just fascinated with the history that we would love to have you come back and speak a second time. I can tell there's probably 3 or 4 times as much again. Nobody could have done this but you. Your experience is remarkable. Thank you so much for sharing this with us and being here.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for having me, and I look forward to the next opportunity.
And if you'd like to hear about Piper history, by the way, Mike Ellis, thank you so much. He just did the math on the equivalent of the 400, and it comes out to 7,000 and change in 2020 dollars.
Yeah, wow.
Relative bargain compared to today's first class tickets. So John Bryerton and I had a chat, and we are doing something that we have never done before, which is we're doing interview format. And I am not a trained interviewer, so I hope you'll bear with me. But let me just make sure that John's here and can unmute. I know he's on the call. And John, are you able to find your unmute button?
I got it.
All right, brilliant.
You find me?
Everyone go back to the speaker view now.
Perfect. And let's see, I guess I should start my own video for a moment. So I'd like to just want to introduce to you all John Bryerton. And normally we don't do a big speaker bio before we get started, but because of the people who are here who want to do Q&A, I just want to mention a few highlights here. You know, usually we just turn it over, but because this is an interview, John, you joined Piper part-time, if I recall, in '63 while still a college student as an engineer. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yep.
Alrighty, and since and then you also have quite a few other capabilities. In addition to being probably best known today as the president of the Piper Aviation Museum in Lockhaven, you have had your DER since 1980, and I want to come back to that because you listed quite a few categories last night that I wasn't even aware of. Worked as an expert witness for Piper, and having Kristen Winter on the line here, I think there might be a unique opportunity for discussing some of the legal challenges Piper faced, since you served Piper as a engineer expert witness and Kristen as an attorney for them a little bit. And then you have a CNC machine that you know how to run and build panels for us, and gosh, just a whole host of other things. You want to add anything there before I jump in? Because I'm going to give you a doozy of a question to start with.
Well, first off, I was in the Akron hangar one time, and I was doing engine icing for the Cheyenne, and we had a break time, and we went into that Akron hangar, and they were testing golf balls in there, and they could change the temperature inside that big old hangar to whatever they wanted, and they had a machine at one end, and they were smacking golf balls with a machine, and down 300 yards away was a sand pit and a transit, and they measured the distance the golf balls went.
Wow.
So it didn't go to waste. Okay.
The hangar's still there, by the way. Akron Fulton Airport, if you ever land there, the hangar's still there.
Well, my flying days are over. Okay, go ahead. I don't know where to start other than the fact that Comanches were being built in Lockhaven when I was here, and they made singles and twins. I got involved in the C model Comanche, static testing and engineering. I got very involved in the Piper PA-40 Arapahoe, and I had some original work on the pressurized Comanche. So I guess the best thing to do is I never drove rivets. I was an engineer, and when it had trouble in the Cheyenne line or the Navajo line, I took off and had to walk through the Comanche line to get there. I was at Piper during the '72 flood when the Comanche line was shut down.
Which makes us all sad today. Just a quick question is, of course, I'm about to ask this question, but can somebody check the chat window? Corey Kroll just mentioned his sound went away.
Mine did?
No, yes, the people. And so if somebody can check the chat window and just let me know whether other people are having trouble hearing.
Well, let me find the chat window.
Okay, it looks like everybody else is okay.
How about me? You hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay.
Yep, somebody can message. Thanks everybody for jumping in. I can see you. If somebody could message Corey and just ask him to reconnect, he should be okay if he comes back in. John, one of the things that I didn't mention, but it's one of the most important things that I saw in your bio, you are one of the very few people that I know of in modern times who marshaled an entire airplane through a new type certificate. And that is the Gavilan, and that came out of a Piper design in the 60s, right? And then got
Nope. Gavilan started with a Piper assembly plant in Columbia, and when Piper shut down the Piper assembly plants, Ford assembly plants, several places in South America, the Lever family couldn't buy airplanes in the United States to put together, so they went all over the world looking for a company that could design them an airplane the way they wanted it. And their primary customer was the missionaries in Amazon River and things like that. And so they wanted to build an airplane that was specifically designed for missionaries. And that's how we got started. So I got an invitation from, well, I happen to know the Piper assembly plant manager in Columbia, and he lived in Lockhaven. So he showed up in the office one day and said, how about you guys designing me an airplane, and went on from there.
So the reason I wanted you to talk to that is one of the things that I thought people might find fascinating is the process of getting an airplane type certificated. And you and I, in getting ready for this, talked about a bit of what went into it, but I don't think we really understand what goes into getting an airplane type certificated. And given that we now have an airplane that we heavily mod and that we're going to need to keep maintaining, that knowledge strikes me as being relevant and helpful to all of us as we figure out how to keep our fleet flying going forward. Would you be willing to talk through that process a little bit?
Well, I related to the game of Dungeons and Dragons. And what happens is you have a set path to get to the top of the mountain, but about every 25 feet, a monster jumps out and takes all your points away from you. So it's the FAA system. Of course, I worked through the worst one on earth, and that's New York, Long Island. And what you have to do is you basically have to go there with a 3-view of the airplane and talk about it for an afternoon, and it goes on from there. You have to produce a certification plan, which was basically take Part 23 and every regulation in Part 23, except a couple, and you have to comply to them. So you get a certification plan and list all, 150 regulations. And the certification plan tells them how you intend to comply. And some of the worst ones are the dynamic seat testing of the airplane, or the seats in the airplane. Basically, you have a big dumb airplane like the Gatling. It doesn't really have any nasty habits. It's a fairly stable airplane. You have to do spin tests for single engine airplanes. So we had to do that. We had to accelerate stops. I'd say the worst thing was, like I say, the spin program. And I was flight test DER, but I handed that off to a different test pilot from out in Wichita. But I flew the chase plane while he was doing his spins, me and an FAA guy. So it's a long, arduous thing. Every test plan has to be written and approved by the FAA. That includes all the static testing, all the flight testing, all the systems testing, electrical, all the power plant issues. We actually built an airplane in Columbia, which was rather unique because they were a kit builder. And what they wanted to do is build an airplane out of spare parts left over from the kit program. Well, Piper wasn't very careful when they made kits. So sometimes you're building a Navajo, there was 4 sets of landing gears and a couple of engines and 4 propellers and more instruments you could ever imagine. And they had me go down to Bogota, and that was an adventure on its own. But I got to Bogota, and one of the first places we went was to the assembly plant, and they had a giant concrete block building with no windows, and row after row after row of pieces from the kit program. And I walked up and down the aisleway and said, boy, I don't see hardly anything we could use in this room. Maybe the tires. But then I went home. Then I get a phone call a little later, and he says, could you help us design an airplane? But we don't want much help. All we really want to do is a 3-view, maybe the engineering analysis for the wings and the tail and the main fuselage. And we did. I hired a couple guys, a structures engineer, and I did a design for most of the airplane on pencil and paper. We sent that down to Columbia. There was a couple things they didn't like, and then he decided to build an airplane from scratch. But in Columbia, you can't get certified material. So needless to say, they were trying to use pop cans and things like that to put this thing together. And they said, well, could you send us some material? I said, well, yeah, we can do that. So we shipped, I don't know, a couple thousand feet of different size 4130 steel tubing, piles of aluminum, And I went down to Columbia and stood in the middle of a hangar and tried to help put this darn thing together. Well, they actually built an airplane and flew it. I think first flight on that airplane was 88 or something. So anyway, we got the airplane together. They flew it around for a while, and then they decided they wanted to get FAA certification for it. So they came to us and said, can you do that? And we said, well, you probably can, but it's going to be big money. And they said, well, they had the money and the loans and everything to do it. And so we sent our application in for the certification of the airplane, which means you have a complete set of drawings from the airplane top to bottom. And after the drawings are all finished, you have to build static test parts, do the static test, and then you have to build a flying conformity prototype. I think first flight in the prototype was 96. And we flew it for about a year before we got our type certificate. How about that?
That sounds like it's amazing. Anybody had any hair left after that one?
Well, I have a PowerPoint presentation that I've given to people in the past, and it's pretty darn bizarre.
Oh my goodness. And John, it looks like we've lost your video. If you look at your device down at the bottom, are you on an iPad?
Yeah.
Yep, at the bottom, if you look at your video, it looks like we need to do a start video on you. I'll do it on mine.
Okay.
And so
okay,
I'm guessing, yep. Hey, you're
Get
back.
me? All right.
Welcome
good.
back.
Maybe you don't want to see me.
Your smiling
All
face.
right, well, that's enough of the gabbling. Sometime you want to do this again, I can do just like the blimp guy or the Hindenburg guy, and I could do a good half hour, 45 minutes with PowerPoint, pictures, all kind of crazy stuff.
Right, and for now, we're just gonna sort of
Let's talk about the
pull
Comanche.
knowledge out of your brain because you've got some amazing stuff. So you were there for the static test of the later model Comanches, and
Yes.
I was curious if you could talk through a little bit about how that static testing process worked, and then a little bit about those battleship scar rivet lines that we've got on our B's and C's in particular, and how they happened.
Well, when they made the airplane, when they made the C model, they went over and got a standard, probably a B model Comanche fuselage off the line and dragged it over to engineering and made the modifications to put that 6th seat in the back and a pocket in the floor. Had to reconfigure the flight controls and some things like that, electrical wiring and everything. And they actually built a fuselage that was in green condition in the C model configuration. Now then they take it into static test room, and the static test room is a 50 by 50 by probably a 30-foot ceiling, and there's a beams, I-beams, channels and everything bolted to the floor, and this cage. And then they did the fuselage and stub wing for the test. And since I don't think they changed the gross weight of the airplane any, they didn't have to retest the wings. But they start pulling on the fuselage, and the worst thing is like a two-wheel landing at a pretty bad condition. And they pull down on the nose and pull down on the tail of the airplane. And when the first couple failed, the airplane fractured through the window line, and it just collapsed like a pancake. So they went and got another fuselage and did the same thing to it, put it back in the frame. And now this time they were real cautious when they put the limit load on it, and it started to give out. And that's when they started coming up with these patches and barn door hinges that are on the belly of that airplane. And Piper didn't engineer that very much. They just said, well, here it bends, we'll just put a patch on it. So like I told you, CJ, they just paint everything white and it doesn't look too bad. But if it was green, in chromate, I mean, it really looks bad. But there's patches all alongside that fuselage, back by the back window and right where the fuselage breaks up into the tail there.
Alrighty, and that's interesting. So as we were looking at installing shoulder harnesses in our Comanches, because as you know, most of them came out of the factory without, we noticed that from the early 180s through the 250s to the 260 series, do you happen to know the history of why there's additional fuselage reinforcement?
You mean to attach shoulder harness?
Yes, because there's additional reinforcements that came into the later models, and it changes the shoulder harness install procedure. That's how we happened to come to notice about it. And I was curious, and some of us were curious how they came about in Piper design.
No,
you know.
I have no idea. I have no idea.
And let's see, Kristen had a question she wanted me to go ahead and bring in. Kristen, do you want to go ahead and ask this? And by the way, Kristen Winter was a lawyer for Piper, and so it's
Okay. As long as she's for Piper, not against Piper.
for Piper, absolutely, absolutely. Kristen, you want to go
I
ahead?
had a tendency of dislike the people that were suing Piper.
Well, no, I was always a defense dog. I was curious, since you said you worked on design elements of the PA-40, what particular characteristics or improvements in the airplane were you trying to make as you were working through the design? What was kind of the some of the goals?
So I was the systems guy, so I had the hydraulics, and this airplane has the Cherokee Arrow hydraulic system in it. And the landing gear is hydraulic, not cable controlled. And the main landing gear on the airplane is, the legs of the landing gear are about 2 inches longer. And they had to cut into the wheel well. They left the trunnion where it belonged, but to pass the gear through the inboard side, they had to cut a couple of bulkheads out and rebuild the wing in that area to let the landing gear go in the hole. So the airplane sits level on the ground. It doesn't have the Comanche squat.
Interesting. Kristen, did you have anything else to follow on?
So the position of the landing gear vis-a-vis the center of lift of the airplane didn't change. It just got taller. Did I understand that correctly?
Right. The landing gear, main landing gear forging, Bolio strut, the forging itself is longer.
Are there any other design imperatives that you were aware of on the PA-40s?
Well, the airplane, the design of the PA-40 was after the 39, so it had counter-rotating engines on it. It had 200 horsepower engines on the side. Let's see what else. Oh, and I was telling CJ, it has a large dorsal fin and a large ventral fin that starts somewhere in the middle of the back of the last seat and goes all the way up into the tail. And on the side of the airplane, they called them strakes. They took a piece of probably 40 thousandths aluminum and bent it into a shape like a tent. And it started back of the wing, right in the wing trailing edge by the fuselage. It's probably 3 inches out, full height. By the time it got back to the stabilator, it was maybe 8 to 10 inches high. Now, I don't recall whether this thing had the 400 tail on it or not, whether it had I don't know what they did to the tail of the airplane. They might have even been a stabilizer elevator system, but I don't recall that. Now they built 2 model airplanes. If you get in, I don't know if you're not familiar with Roger's book, I'm going to hold one up. Roger's book. Everything you want to know about Piper aircraft's in that book. And there are several pictures of the PA-40 in that book, plus engineering drawings and some things like that. I never flew in the PA-40. There was 3 built. One of them crashed in Lockhaven, spun into the ground. One was given to Purdue as I guess, an engineering study airplane. And I don't know what happened to the other one, but the one in Purdue was purchased and it belongs to a guy in Texas. He took a couple of engines and a bag of tools, and he went up to Purdue, did an annual inspection on it. Oh, I think he had the propellers overhauled. He got a ferry permit, took it down to Texas, and he is restoring it to its original paint job and condition that it came out of Piper. I think he was planning on go to Oshkosh this year, but that's not going to happen. Maybe next year.
And I just saw, oh, there you go. So from John McGowan, he said the Wikipedia photo shows the Comanche 400 tail on the PA-40.
Okay.
And so what's happening here is
pretty much a standard tail, an Aztec tail, right?
Yes. Yep. Exactly. Because the 400 got the Aztec tail. It was a little different than the rest of us, as it were.
Yeah.
Yep. And Pat Kiefer just noted that she thinks it might be in Canton, Texas. Pat Kiefer, do you know anything more about that one than that? You'll have to unmute, Pat. Okay, she said, nope, looked it up online. Good deal.
Well, I know he's in Texas. He got a ferry permit. He got there okay. I had several emails from him because he was asking me questions about the airplane, and then I lost contact with the guy. So I don't even have his emails. It was about maybe a year and a half ago or 2 years ago when he got the airplane.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, a couple of things before I get into more questions. One of the things that John did was he, as a DER in particular, but also just as an engineer, John, you got involved a lot with STCs for the Piper aircraft lines, right?
Well, yes, Pipers, Cessnas, Aerostars, you name it. I've done STCs on Agcats, Pawnees. I don't know, over my career, I've probably done, I don't know, 100 STCs.
Wow. Well, because the STCs are so critical for our aircraft, I wonder if you could walk us through a little bit the process then and now. Like 10 years ago, you'd mentioned STCs were fairly easy to get, and you said now it's a bit of a headache.
Yeah.
Would you mind?
Well, I don't deal with things like autopilots and things like that. I'm a mechanical kind of guy, and I used to have electrical DER, but since I didn't do much in electrical, I just gave it up. But I know that there's quite a process. There are advisory circulars produced by the FAA. Best thing to do is, if you're interested in, I could even send you information on what advisory circular documents that you need to get. But they go through the whole process, and I'll tell you, better have a DER that knows what he's doing to start it, because you're just not going to do it yourself. It's kind of like you got to be an attorney to practice in the court. You got to be a DER to practice in the FAA, and that's all there is to it.
Mm.
But there's
interesting,
and also they don't advise it, but you can do region shopping. But they want, if you're the applicant, they'd like to have the application go to the regional office where you live. So I happen to live in Pennsylvania, which makes it the Long Island or Eastern Region FAA office. It all goes through the aircraft certification office. Doesn't go through FSDO, doesn't go through MIDO. It's the certification office. And when you put your application in for an STC, they will assign a project manager for you. And that person will be your contact person. But what happens when you go in for these review meetings, they pile on. So everybody in the office gets a chance to tell you how stupid you are. So that's the way it works, you know.
Right. And then a question for you. And by the way, can you talk? You said there are 3 flutter DERs in the U.S., and we're not going to talk about autopilots.
I think there's only about 3 that do Part 23 flutter. Now, one of the best ones on Earth was a guy by the name of John Baker, and he lived in San Antonio. Great guy, never had any trouble with the FAA, and he died here about 6 months ago, and he was 75 years old, and and he was a very nice guy, friend of mine. And he did the Gavilan. He did probably every Piper airplane from the Navajo right on through. So he did all the flutter testing. And there was a guy by the name of Carlos Latoni, and he lived in Vero Beach, and he was the guy that did most of Piper aircraft flutter work in Florida. If you're looking for a flutter guy, the best thing to do is go to the FAA website and look up their list of DERs. Look for the state around you first, and then start fanning out, looking for a flutter DER.
Well, just the story you told me that I thought was particularly fascinating was, so for anybody that owns a Comanche, there's a somewhat hair-raising video of flutter that was a flutter test that was done with a Comanche online. So if you want to have a thrill, look up the.
Look at them, right? That's what I told you. That's why VNE means VNE, right?
Yes, and that's what I wanted to get to. Is you mentioned, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that. We often, as pilots, are like, oh well, they over-engineer everything, and so we see those V speeds. And I wonder if you could tell everybody what you told me last night about V speeds and that they mean it and why. How much time they put into finding those.
What's in the book. Piper spent hours and hours and hours to get those numbers. I mean, if you look at your best rate of climbing speed, they probably took them 2 or 3 weeks of testing on an airplane, and with your airplane different loadings and things like that to get to the best rate or best angle to climb. The same thing when it goes like your VNEs and things like that. They had a flutter guy come out, and he, well, originally the airplane, they didn't even know anything about flutter. So you just, you better pay attention to what was in the book. But they didn't know anything about flutter. Flutter is kind of relatively new science on airplanes. And there was airplanes that crashed a lot and they couldn't understand why. But probably in, I don't know, I'm thinking like 1965 or something, some brilliant guy said, well, maybe you ought to check the elasticity of these airplanes and tails and things. And that's when the DER system started to evolve. And that's why you have the weights on the tails of your airplane. And that's, so what I told you the other night when we were doing airspeed calibration, we had about a 5-mile or 10-mile railroad track just west of us, and it was straight as a dart. And the Piper went up there with the railroad company, and then they measured off miles and half a miles and painted the railroad ties white so they knew where they were. And you'd start up probably a couple thousand feet and come down and fly across it at, say, 60 mile an hour or 60 knots, then go to 70, then go to 80, go to 90, until you're clear up to VNE on the airplane with the airspeed calibration. And the airspeed calibration is based upon the static port location on the fuselage. And they kept finding different locations for the static ports. Pitos are all basically the same. Once you find the location on the wing for your airspeed pickup, that's pretty much of a no-brainer. But the static system on the airplane affects the altimeter and the airspeed indicator. So when they say now there is, most books have a little bit of a calibration in the back section that tells you what the error might be in the airspeed indicator. So I haven't looked at one for a while, but most airplanes do have that.
Yeah, but that was fascinating. I confess that I did not realize that that VNE is like, don't ever exceed VNE on your airplane. I hate to admit it because
the Piper Malibu, the first Malibu, they had a couple fatal. Well, I think I had one fatal accident and a couple bailouts because the tail came off the airplane. And I'll tell you, I had a friend that was a salesman, and he had the first Malibu up here in Lockhaven. And we decided to go, I think went out to Pittsburgh or someplace, and we're up maybe 10,000 feet or something like that, and we were 30 miles away from Pittsburgh, and he starts to let down, and he has a power off. That darn airplane is so clean and so smooth that I mean, the airplane's quiet, and I guess pilots got in this darn thing, and it's such a sleek airplane that they get to the last minute and control says, all right, let down to 2,000 or something, and they just push the nose over before they realize they're going red line. So that was a bad thing. And I know there was a couple really bad accidents with the first Malibus. Piper airplanes are never like, well, the Lockhaven airplanes usually didn't have that problem. But you get a glider or something like that airplane, it was, also that airplane wasn't very structurally strong, I didn't think, but well, I don't know, maybe some of you people own one, but I don't know. So the first couple airplanes they built the airplane, and if you put all the people in the airplane, you couldn't close the door. The fuselage was bending. Right? So,
that's why they did those static tests.
Yeah, they did the static test after they sold them. Right?
Oh man, that's
those are
Kristen's listening and tearing her hair out.
Right, I shouldn't be telling those secrets. But anyway, they don't do that anymore.
Right. By the way, what are your DER certifications, past and current? You mentioned you had let one go, but you still got
originally, when I was originally what they call a DOA. I was a designated option authority engineer for Piper aircraft, which means that you had an engineer chief in each department, like hydraulics, structures, flight tests, and they were in a book, plus an alternate person. So the FAA let you approve your own design. And then every 2 years, the FAA would send a guy out of New York, and we would come to Lockhaven, and they would audit your books. But when Piper closed, the DOA system was closed off. And I asked them if I could have my consulting DER. And they said, well, you've already have 10 years experience doing this, might as well. So they gave me flight test, flight analyst, mechanical systems, power plant, electrical, and flammability.
Wow.
Now I've slowly, well, I lost my medical. I didn't lose my pilot's license. I lost my medical about 5 years ago, and the FAA didn't think it was a good idea to be a flight test pilot if I couldn't fly. So that was the end of that. I didn't hardly do any electrical, so I dropped that. I still have mechanical systems, and I still have propulsion. And if you look in Part 23, CFR 14, Part 23, open the book, and there are sections. And power plant has to be subpart E. And systems equipment is subpart F. So I'm responsible for the regulations of subpart E and subpart F. I'm also an administrative DER, or management DER, which gives me the authority to help people with certification programs.
Wow. You must be pretty rare.
Yeah, I am. They don't give consulting DERs out hardly ever again. Most of the DERs are company DERs. So that's how Boeing got in trouble with their MAX, whatever that airliner was they had.
Oh yeah, the MAX 8.
Yeah, the MAX 8, because the news was all over the fact that it was consulting DER approvals. Well, no, it was company DER approvals, and Boeing has hundreds of them. And the FAA doesn't actually go into a company like that, but except to maybe if there's a problem or if they have an audit every couple years. So you're on your own. So
crazy.
That's the way it works. Well, the FAA is way understaffed. They can't possibly do this on their own. So as a result of this, you have 500 DERs running around the United States, like me. So,
handling the engineering work everywhere we need it. Yeah.
Well, a DER is allowed to approve design. That's it. DER is allowed to approve design. I cannot approve an airplane for flight airworthiness. I cannot approve 337s. I can approve design. And what I do is I say that this design complies to a regulation when I sign my name.
Mm.
And once a year, I have to go to brainwashing school once a year, and then I have to go and send all my paperwork in at the end of the year to make sure that I've done enough work to be qualified.
So it's a lot of work keeping that all up, and you help all of
Well,
us
yeah,
keep
I
flying.
even have to pay to take my course. I have to pay to take the test.
Well, in that case, we're happy to know you're out there. So everybody, John consults.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
And GATS, General Aviation, want to just say something real quick about your company so we know you're out there, because to have not just a DER with your certifications or your approvals,
there was
but
20,
a Piper.
There was 20 of us. When Piper started rattling the cage about we were all going to Florida to live, and that was 1980. And a bunch of it, all the section chiefs of the DOA engineers, I think there was 7 of us. We went to a local bar and ordered a couple of drinks and decided how we could use our services to certify airplanes. And we came up with the name General Aviation Technical Services. So we had a guy that was an FAA expert. I had a structures guy, an electrical guy, a flight test pilot guy. There was 7 of us who started the company. And this company was actually the father of the Javelin airplane. So it wasn't just me. So we all got together, and when we got the task to build an airplane in Columbia, we had an office at the airport, Lockhaven. And we had a couple other employees. But when the Javelin came on board, we started hiring designers and draftsmen real fast. We got up to, I think, 25 employees. Now there's only me. Okay.
Oh, man. Well, we're happy to know that you're still there, because for our aircraft, as we start to face, another 50 years of flying Comanches, expertise like yours and the people that you know of are crucial for keeping these flying. They seem to be doing great so far, but we do have a question that I want to get to before I get to some of the more of the ones that you and I talked about last night. There's an impression that there are a fair number of ADs for the Comanche. And so from your standpoint, do you consider the Comanche an engineering success looking back?
Well, sure. The ADs are just because of service that they are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people report something, and first thing, if there's something wrong with the airplane, you contact the contact the FAA or the Oklahoma City and file a report. And then that report goes to Piper Aircraft Service Department, and they start piling this stuff up. If the FAA thinks that there's something serious, then they'll write an AD. And the ADs are usually say, do it before next flight, or do it within the next 25 hours, or do it within the next 100 hours. But if it's a pretty nasty one, they'll just tell you that it's bad and you have to do it right away. And you have to comply. That's it. That's the way the rule is.
Yep. And as you pointed out, they're understaffed, so their job is to keep us safe. And if somebody says credibly, there's a problem.
A lot of this stuff gets passed through the NTSB. You know, if there's an accident and the NTSB sees it just was something wrong with Comanches or Navajos or something like that, it works its way through the FAA. But like I said, the FAA moves at the speed of smell, so it can take 2 or 3 years before they get it.
So if somebody reports something and there's no evidence in the NTSB statistics at all, then what normally happens next?
NTSBs pick up the wreckage, and then they do it. Takes about 2 years to write a report to find out what they found out. When they do, the NTSB report goes to the FAA head office in Washington, D.C. And then once it goes through that and everybody has a chance to comment on it, then they'll get the type certificate holder on board with the service department and figure out how they're going to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
So usually a minor or something you should take care of. It comes out as a service letter. It'll be printed with green on the top. And then if that's not so bad, you'll get a service bulletin, and it comes out and has a red letter printed on the top. And then if that doesn't work, then you'll get an airworthiness directive from the FAA to all of the owners of that airplane through the serial number bracket where there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep. And
that's the way it works.
sure. And the reason I asked my question was because in a case where somebody says to the FAA, there's a problem with a part, but there is absolutely zero evidence in NTSB reports of the part being a problem after, oh, I don't know, 50 years of flying. I'm assuming if it's a credible source, the FAA still needs to act.
Oh yeah, they will if they had an accident.
But if there are no accidents,
of corrosion, well then I think Oklahoma City is the first part of contact, and they count up the reports of a problem, and then if it becomes an issue, then NTSB gets involved in it, and then it trickles down to the FAA and goes from there. But if you have a corrosion issue, Piper would look at that first, and they'll probably issue a service bulletin on. I know there's one on the Cherokee now. You have to take the fuel tank out. Got wing spark corrosion. So everybody's in uproar over that. But apparently only some airplanes have this corrosion. But it's a bear to take the tank out to do this inspection. So
yeah, we're sorry for the Cherokees.
Yeah, right. Well, the Aerostar is a good example of it too. So Aerostar had a lot of service bulletins and service letters. Apparently they were piling up out there at Ted Smith in California. Piper bought the airplane, they bought the problems.
That happens. Question from Robert, what happened to the PA 380? Or if
No
it was
such
the
a thing.
390? Okay, so it was the 390, the one that Swearington built for Pug?
No. That's twin engine airplane. It was called a 290.
290.
Two 6-cylinder engines in it. Two 290 horsepower twin engine airplane. That airplane in Roger's book, there's a picture of it in there, but it looks to me like it's parked in the weeds at Lockhaven, and I don't know whatever happened to it. Pug and Tony Piper drove it around a lot, but I know I don't want to take too much time, but I'll tell you kind of a cute story with that thing. I understand that Swearingen had the airplane done, so I think it was probably Tony Piper or Pug, I'm not sure which one, went down to Swearingen to get it, to bring it home. And it was, one of my friends was one of the engineers that went down to help pick the airplane up. There was 2 of them on the airplane. So on their way home, they decided that they'd fly it up to Wichita and maybe show a few people what it was. So apparently they were headed in there, and Cessna was I don't know what version of a Cessna there was, but they caught up to this Cessna, probably a 340 or something like that, or 320. They caught up to it. And so they started waving and talking on the radio to this guy in the 320 next door to him. And they wanted to know what was in this Piper airplane. So the guy went out and he went past him as fast as he could, and he climbed up to about 500 feet above it, came in behind the airplane, feathered an engine, and then passed him with an engine feather. As soon as they got to Wichita, they were all over the airplane, had the cowling off and everything, looking at it. But the secret was out. But Piper never produced that airplane, never. Now,
and you've worked on...
What's that?
No, you keep going.
Well, I'm just saying that you're talking about like a 380. The biggest engine Piper had, biggest engine that Lycoming had when these Comanches were around, either singles or twins, was a 300 horsepower. Then when the Navajo, they developed a 350, developed a 325, then they developed a 350 engine for the Navajo. But Lycoming had no 6-cylinder engines, even turbocharged engines that went more than 300 or 310 horsepower back in the 60s. Now the 400 was an 8-cylinder engine, but I don't know of any Comanches that had 8-cylinder engines, except the 400.
Yeah.
So there was no such a thing as a 380 engine that I ever heard of. And I looked in Roger's book before I got online with you, and there's nothing in Roger's book about a 380. Now there's a 300, and I told you I worked on the 300.
Tell us about the 300.
Well, the 300 horsepower single engine Comanche was a next gen single engine Comanche. And I did the power plant, I did the cooling, I don't know, some other things. I did the contours for the cowling on the 300. I had a lot to do with the propeller and fuel system and some things like that. I think the 300, we got rid of that bird's nest under the floor they call fuel system. So if you've ever been in a twin Comanche, just take that panel off and look down there. You'll just die. It's awful. But, well, there's more bends in the tubing than you could ever imagine. And of course, they have problems with the selector valve. So they leak.
Right.
There's been some accidents where somebody left the drain open and sucked air and cut the engine out. So that's a bad thing. So
Undesirable. What modifications did you guys come up with for the 300 that you think you would, in retrospect, put back onto the rest of the Comanches if we could do it?
Well, I don't think it was anything in there, except it was just a little bit more power in the engine. That's all. There wasn't. If you looked at one, you could not tell the difference between that and like a 260. It just looked the same.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So you're saying don't change our airplanes because
no. Don't want to do that. No. There's nothing there that you think you ought to have.
Okay. So they're perfect, is what you're telling us.
Yeah, they're a pretty good airplane. I wouldn't mess around with them a little bit. That's a good airplane. You get in them and they fly, and they're nice to fly, comfortable, fast. What else do you want?
We love them. We're part of the reason we're all here is because we want to say thank you for making our airplanes. We love them.
Well, I'm not responsible for the Comanche. And that was done in 1954 or 55. I think Mooney had a lot to do with it. And Swearingen had a lot to do with it. And the Piper boys had a lot to do with it. There's a guy in Roger's book that was one of the best designers I ever knew in my life. A guy's named Robert Catoni. Bob's been dead for quite a few years, but Bob is probably the father of the Comanche, Arapaho, Navajo, and a lot of the neat airplanes that Piper built. And Bob Catoni started at Piper when he was a teenager. I don't think the guy had any kind of college education, but I want to tell you, that guy was brilliant. So.
Is that what happened? Yeah. We got Bob Catoni's brains behind our airplane.
The guy, Bobby Catoni. It was him, and Bobby Catoni was one of the real good guys that I got to know very well. And it was another guy by the name of Robert Edelstein, and Bob Edelstein was the airframe guy. But Bob Catoni was kind of the concept guy. And we had an artist, Dick Clark. And I'll tell you, you scratch something out in a piece of paper, you took it up to Dick Clark, and he made a fantastic drawing of it, or actually watercolor paint. If you can get yourselves a hand on an original Dick Clark watercolor, you got something.
We're all checking eBay right now. That would be amazing. And if you guys find them, make sure that Piper Museum gets a copy of those so that we can continue to support the museum.
Well, we have several of them, and I personally own 2 or 3.
Wow.
Speaking of that Piper Museum, I put together a quick PowerPoint if you want to do a quick tour of the museum here.
You know, everybody is asking on the chat window, John, and I a couple of things just so everybody knows. That John happened to mention to me that when he got there were 5,200, John, is that right? 5,200 Comanches sitting on the lot out there in various stages.
There was 5,400 sitting on the grass.
Oh, yep. Gotcha. So we really want to hear about the museum because we really want to support the museum. And then I want to come back a little bit to a few points that you raised the other night. How did Piper customize airplanes when they were in the process of getting ordered, and how did they put them together? But we've got everybody here. Can you talk to us a little bit about how the museum's doing, what your situation is, a little bit about that facility over so we can spread the word on, because the Piper Aviation Museum at Lockhaven is really the most core place in the world for our heritage as Comanche drivers. It's the place where, you know, the Lockhaven models are featured. So if you want to talk a little bit about what you've got and what your situation is and how we can help, we're interested.
Well, the situation is that we rented 10,000 square feet of the third floor of the engineering building to a gas company, Pennsylvania UGI, gas distribution company. They paid almost 10,000. They paid $9,000 a month rent up there. And our income our income is virtually nil because our admission charge is only $5 or $6. So everybody that goes through the museum, we supplement them like $15 a head using our income from other sources. Now UGI has left. They'll be out September the 30th. We don't have that $9,000 a month. We got to find a tenant. It's a beautiful, ready to move in office. They've left their furniture, their computer mods, lunchroom, training room, 3 big main offices. It's absolutely gorgeous. Rug everywhere. It's been remodeled. It has fiber optic into that place. I can't, full course local telephone. We got very good internet in this building because of them. But now they're leaving, and so we got to do something about that. So I would really like to find a tenant that doesn't want to work at home. They need this kind of space, and that's why UGI left. They're customer support. So the girls packed up their computers and went home to work, and they decided they didn't need all that office space. So I'm a victim of the coronavirus. So, that's it. You know, we're done if we don't find a decent tenant for that. And I'm scratching my head. You're not going to find anybody in Lockhaven. I can tell you that. I mean, Lockhaven's a small town, very safe. We don't have riots and things like that. Only 2 or 3 police officers on duty at any one time. So anyway, Lockhaven is now we're about 21 or 22 miles from the stadium of Penn State football. So it's easy that way. We're 25 miles from Williamsport. The State College or Penn State University Airport is towered. They've got, I think they're up around 5,000 feet for runway. They're a very good airport. They fly in, biggest stuff in there is I think they've had some Airbuses in there flying, but I don't know. Mostly regional jet though. And we're sitting on the airport in Lockhaven. So, you can look out the windows at UGI offices and you're looking right down the middle of the runway.
So if somebody were to rent that office and make a donation directly to the museum in lieu of rent, I wonder if that would be tax deductible for them. I'm thinking more of like
well, we're 501c3, so we take anything. We've taken a lot of airplanes that they're considered donation. Well, that 400 Comanche we got was a write-off for the guy that owned it. So we give them a tax paper, and now we're not permitted to do an appraisal. So we have a guy we deal with that does appraisals for airplanes.
Yeah. So if anybody knows of it, and you said you've got 60 cubicles in that office, how many is it?
Probably 40, but they're in an X pattern, and there's, I don't know, there must be, 15 of them, and they're like in an X pattern, and there are dividers in between them.
Yeah.
With overhead, bookshelves and stuff in each one of these pods. That's what they call them, pods. And they're spaced about, I'm thinking they must be spaced about 10 feet apart. And they're wired into the system. They're wired into the Cat 5 equipment. I mean, once we get going, right now we have to do something, and we're looking at trying to hire a good commercial real estate agent or something. They haven't been here yet, but we're going to have to do that if we can't find something on our own.
Yep. So, and just post in the chat window or text or email if you're interested in a benefit fly-in to Lockhaven to take the birds home to see mom and maybe support the Piper Aviation Museum. I think John was saying that he thinks the folks that do Sentimental Journey would probably work with the museum to help kind of create a party of it. So if it's something you'd be interested in, we can help coordinate that. Pete Morse is also a fly-in coordinator par excellence. You'll note there's quite a few fly-ins. And
well, I think this year is out for anything. I remember weather's going to turn on us here, and so if you're going to look at something, it probably should be next year. And if you're interested in hooking up with Sentimental Journey, I know. Well, Cal Order is the president, and the vice president is the airport manager at Lockhaven. So if there's any interest in that, I know those people very well, and we could just pass the word along, and we could maybe have any real event, you know?
You know, typically Oshkosh is the world's largest gathering of Comanches, with Sun and Fun a close second. And so with those not having happened this year, maybe we just need to roll our own and help help support the Piper Aviation Museum at the same time. So we'll roll that amongst ourselves and see how it comes out. I know we had 50-something people and 20 at the last second to last Lockhaven fly-in that we did without a whole lot of advertising, and that was 20 Comanches. Remember, they were all over the ramp. You guys opened the parking lot and threw out the cars, and we all barely fit in through that fence and parked in front of the museum.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, we emptied the parking lot. We don't have that problem anymore because there's nobody there.
We parked them all around the building. We had them on the side and in the back and everything.
Yeah, we can do that. That's no problem. You go through the fence.
Yep.
We have a very nice party room, seat about 150 people, and it's modernized kitchen and everything.
Well, fruity drinks are on order.
What do you think, CJ? Should I go ahead and share these pictures that I've got?
Well, you should accept that I have a bunch of questions that people want to ask John about, like, the culture at Piper during the late Comanche development. I'd love to have John talk a little bit more about two things. One is, what happened when the Piper brothers sold out to Punta? Bangor, yep. And how did that happen, and how did the culture change? And then a question from Chris Burnley was, what was the culture like at Piper during the late Comanche development? Were they obsessed with beechcraft, or was a big goal that they were chasing, another big goal that they were chasing that was driving development? So those are some of the...
Well, I wasn't there, but when I came in 64 as a full-time employee, Piper's sales was skyrocketing. They were making airplanes and selling airplanes like crazy, and everybody was having a good time. And I do remember that Piper had a bonus program. And being a new employee, of course, everybody sitting around me said I don't get one because I had to be there for a year. So everybody's coming out of the office at Christmas time with blue envelopes and peeking at what they got. And so I just mind my own business. And Walter Jamino, was in the corner office. He's a very famous chief engineer at Piper. And he called me in the office and he says, "John, you've been doing a good boy. Here's a little something for you." And he gave me a blue envelope. Well, my salary at Piper when I started was $11,000 a year. And I opened my envelope and it was $2,000. And I was single, living in the basement of my mom's house. What do you do with $2,000? Right? How you can buy a new Chevy for $2,000? So anyway, I was a rich man. And so anyway, the next couple years were very good for Piper, probably 64, 65, 66. The Cheyenne came out. They couldn't make them fast enough. They were doing very good. And then in around 1971, 72 is when the Chris-Craft Corporation was buying stock on the stock exchange and ended up with about 45% of the stock of Piper aircraft, which at that time was selling for like $12 a share. And then somebody whispered in Bill Piper's ear and said, "Hey, you better check that out." Well, Bill and the family, all of them, they had the controlling shares of Piper, but there was executives at Piper that had stock options, and Bill and the family didn't own it all. So they counted on these people that were getting stock options over a few years to get on their side. And now, by this time, stock got up to $75 a share, so people were getting a little anxious about selling the stock they had. So they made a deal with Bangor Punta Corporation, and the stock option people and the Piper family sold their stock to Bangor Punta, which gave Bangor Punta controlling interest in the company. And then part of the deal was the boys would stay, no problem. And about 2 years later, they sent in a chief executive officer from Bangor Punta, and the guy's name was Helms. I don't remember what his credentials were, but there weren't much. But anyway, he came in and started reorganizing everything and getting rid of people, and the boys left. So Helms and his henchmen started running the company. And then Chris-Craft sued Piper Aircraft over that event. And it took about 7 years to settle it, that Bangor Punta ended up owning the company and Chris-Craft had to go away. And then Bangor still owned it when they started moving the Navajo down to Florida, which was 74, 75. It was union problems and so forth. So they moved the Navajo to Florida. And then after the airplane was in Florida, they sold the company to Lear-Sigler Corporation. And by this time, Piper Lockhaven was closed. Well, I think Piper Lockhaven was there when Lear-Sigler bought the company. And Lear-Sigler might have been the people that drove the stake into the heart of Piper. But I don't know. I wasn't privy to that kind of stuff. But I made good money, had a good time.
One of the things you talked to me about a bit is, well, a quick question. So John McGowan had heard the Comanche, and I have heard this too, the Comanche wing's identical to the T-28 and first cousin of the P-51 Mustang. Is that true? And if so, was that a Piper decision, or was it related to the Mooney design that Piper paid for, if you know?
No, they had nothing to do with it. There wasn't anything like that. Now, Piper got into the Enforcer program. Piper, now they were down in Lakeland when they did that. They re-engined a bunch of P-51 Mustangs because they were looking for the military was looking for a low-cost fighter airplane. So apparently there was a lot of P-51s in the desert someplace, so they went out, fetched a half a dozen of them and put big turbine engines on them. And that was Piper's Enforcer program. You can look that up, you can Google that.
Cool. Speaking of turbine engines, can you tell us about the 600 horsepower Comanche?
Did you get my picture?
Oh, hang on. If so, I'll share it to Pete Morse. In the meanwhile.
Well, anyway, I sent you a picture of the 600 horsepower Comanche.
Apologies. I'm looking it up now, and I'll send it to Pete to show.
You found it? Okay.
I do. Yep, I've got it.
That's an 8.5 by 11 glossy that I happen to have.
Beautiful. Pete, if you can enable screen sharing with me for just a moment. I will bring it up. Am I good to go? Let's see.
Yes, you have screen share.
Alrighty, and on an iPhone, I think, hopefully, this will let me just go over to, I see. Stand by one, folks. I just have to save this JPEG to my photos, and then we are good to go. Alrighty.
I have it here if you want.
Oh, beautiful. Yep, go ahead then. If you've got it, you screen share.
Nope.
That's the 3 engine.
Oh, that's the 3 engine. That's the Frankenmanche.
Yeah,
Yeah,
though, John, if you wanna talk to that for just a second while I get Pete a copy of this.
No, I don't know anything about that thing. It's the only thing I could guess is it might have been a research airplane of some sort. And it looks to me like it's a single engine Comanche that they put twin engines on it. And that might have even been Swearingen. I don't know.
He got up to a lot, clearly, and Pete, that should be on its way for when you get it. So so you have all these Comanches, they're building them in lots of 50. And
Yep.
then what happens when somebody wants to order a Comanche? How did Piper customize aircraft back in the day? Like, what was that buying process like, if you know?
Well, the Comanche didn't really get too much into they spec built, and if you wanted tip tanks and turbochargers and things like that, they built that off on the line. But they had a certain standard interiors, 2 or 3 different ones, a couple different paint jobs that you could buy. But a customer, the delivery center wasn't done, so you really couldn't go to the delivery center and pick out nice stuff. And that didn't happen really until we started building Cheyennes. So they had a room over there that had seats and everything in it, and interiors and different instrument panels. And so when you bought a Cheyenne, you went in that room with your family or whatever and picked your stuff. And seating configurations, club seating, passenger seating, cargo seating, things like that. And then once that was ordered, Piper built you an airplane. Probably took 6 months to get it. But they didn't do that a whole lot with the Comanches that I remember anyway. I do know when they were making Cheyennes, I'd go to the paint shop and there was, I don't know, whatever they wanted, they painted. It was black ones. I remember them painting one black. And boy, you don't want to paint your airplane black. You could see every wrinkle and rivet for miles. It was ugly. I think that went overseas to Players or something. I had some pictures of it, but I don't know where they are. But it was really bad. One of the reasons why Piper painted them white is because you just couldn't see all the wrinkles.
Now we know. The secret is out. Right. Yep.
No, there was no secret to it. That's what they did.
Seeing as we have you and Kristen, I think we still have Kristen on. You had some amazing stories to tell about about dealing with Piper litigation, about who would sue, why they would sue, what was going on, the best type of juror to have.
Best juror, yeah, you have a lawyer on there. She'll tell me what that is. But that is always neat because we went out and I used to go as expert witness. And because I was in systems and equipment, so it was either landing gears, hydraulics, or something else, or pressurization or something. But they used to call me to train lawyers mostly. Now, I did stand on the witness stand a few times, but not really very often. And they would bring me up there and qualify me as an expert and ask me 3 or 4 questions, and then up to the end of it. But yeah, Piper had us all in a room one time, and they had attorneys in there, and they were telling us all about this litigation. And they told us that the best juror was a mailman. And everybody looked at him like we were crazy. And he says, no, he says, the mailman's the best person on earth. He said, their job is to put the mail in the mailbox. And if he's driving a truck and it breaks down, he just calls the headquarters and said, bring me another truck. Or if I'm stuck in the snow, pull me out. He's not supposed to touch that mail truck or anything. And so he's supposed to have an empty mind when it comes to technology. And a person like me, they'd throw me off a jury in just one question. What did you do for a living? So no, I never was on a case where that I ended up being on the jury for an aviation accident. Never. But I watched a lot of them.
Any lessons from those?
Well, like I think I told you the other night, is we used to, the attorneys would say, it's pretty bad, but you're pretty good if you don't have a survivor. If you have no survivors from the accident, you don't have a wife and 5 kids sitting there screaming their heads off about how bad Piper aircraft was and everything, and then of course the jury becomes very sympathetic if you have a witness, and it's over. Piper's going to lose. Now they always sued Piper, Lycoming, Hartzell Propeller, and whoever the radio manufacturer was in the airplane. So they always would come up with about 5 defenders, and they would weed them out. But it usually ended up in Piper's lap or Lycoming's lap. And almost everyone I was ever was either settled out of court or Piper had to pay. The insurance company had to pay. Now, Piper was well insured, USAIG. And they got hit pretty darn hard. So the one that put Piper out of business was a crash in Shannon, Ireland. It was called the Carlucci case. The guy, he had to follow a Jeep out to the end of the runway. It was about 4,500 foot runway. He poured the coals to it, went down the runway, trying to follow the stripe in the middle of the runway, and he never rotated. He just came to the end of the runway and ran through the trees and into a concrete wall and killed everybody on board. So the trial was in England, somewhere in England. Ireland, I think maybe it was. Anyway, it's a Carlucci case. So they tried it and lost over there big time. So then the owner of the airplane and one of the passengers on the airplane lived in Florida. So they got sued by this guy's family in Florida. And that's the one I was telling you about, them subpoenaing everything that I had in my desk. And they brought a bunch of girls in there with shopping carts and copy machines, and they copied every document that anybody had in anybody's desk on the 3rd floor of engineering. They spent probably 3 weeks doing that, making copies of everything and hauling it out. I actually personally was involved in the lawsuit. They named my name, and it was really nasty. I know a couple of guys really got broke. The chief engineer, Cal Wilson, he turned into a vegetable. It was bad.
Oh, wow.
And I'll tell you what that was. What they found was that Piper was destroying evidence on stability and control. Piper in the flight test office had a sign-out sheet. And so if an airplane went out for test, you had to go to the flight test office, put your name on there, the end number you were going to fly, and what you were going to do. Well, it was kind of a free-for-all, a lot of us pilots, and if you wanted to go to have your $100 lunch, you could go over to flight test and take a Navajo or something like that, and you didn't sign it out. Well, they kept a record when the airplanes went out by log sheets. Well, what was Bryerton doing? Was this a flight test? Did he hide evidence? And it really, I mean, they decided that Piper was hiding evidence. And we lost a case on that fact. And of course, they cleaned that mess up. But anyway, it was bad.
And so the fact that somebody ran an airplane off the end of the runway and into a concrete wall ended up being a decision on Piper hiding evidence.
Yep. Now, I'll tell you another thing. They had that guy's logbook. I think the guy was a German, was flying the airplane. And they had the guy's logbook. And he'd been denied his instrument rating like twice. And the comment in the logbook was, retracted the landing gear and failed to rotate. It was right there. It was in writing. So it was under the hood or something, and he's pouring down the runway, and he pulled the gear up and didn't pull back in the control wheel. So that was pretty nasty. And I was project engineer in Pawnee, and we had a lot of trouble with Pawnees because they hit the crop, they hit the barn, they hit the tree. We got sued for the chemicals they were using in the Pawnee because they got cancer. What did Piper have to do with that? We were contributory negligence because we built the airplane. There's the airplane, man, right in front of me. Everybody see that?
And it's all recorded.
What is it?
It's a Garrett, it's an Air Research. It wasn't Garrett then. The engine was an Air Research TPE 331, 650 horsepower gas turbine engine. If you look right ahead of the wing is where the exhaust came out. It was one of them on both sides. And that airplane went, I think we gave them a 400, and they took it out to Phoenix, and that's where Air Research was, and they put the engine on. Interesting, huh?
I bet its ground roll on takeoff wasn't all that long. It accelerated pretty fast, didn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I was telling CJ here the other day that I did some STCs with turbine engines on Cessna 210s, and I have 450 horsepower Rolls-Royce engines on them, and I know the airplane would take off with the wheels locked, with the brakes locked. And when we took off down the runway, you didn't really have to do anything except point the nose in the air, and the rate of climb indicator would go to 6,000 foot a minute for like 30 seconds. And I mean, these airplanes got a lot of power, and they sound like a doggone vacuum cleaner, you know, so they're pretty impressive. At this airplane, you just put the airplane, you could put the propeller in reverse and back up. So you like to park in line, you could just pull a position and back up. Hang on to that picture, it'll be worth something someday.
Any idea how fast it would go?
Well, it's still at a VNE, and you have to be careful, even though you have all that power in there. Now, the one thing that happens that's kind of unusual is if you take a piston-powered airplane and you certify it with a turbine engine, you get the speed. You don't get VNE anymore. You get a VMO, which is velocity maximum operating. Velocity maximum operating speed. So what they do is like when we do it with the 210s, is the customers of this airplane take it up to, it's a high altitude airplane. It was actually a P210M pressurized airplane. So the customers would take this airplane up to 18, 19,000 feet where you're indicated airspeed. So you could put it right on the VMO indicated airspeed at 20,000 feet. Because the engine's starting out on the ground with 600 horsepower, where a piston airplane starts off with 200 horsepower, and when you get to 20,000 feet, there's nothing left, unless you have turbo. So that's what they like, because it go fast. I mean, the ground speed at 167 VMO is 260, 270 miles an hour. They're expensive.
I guess we always wondered what would happen if we married our laminar flow wings that like high altitudes with an engine that likes high altitudes, and I guess there it is.
Yeah. Well, see, one thing with a turbine engine, as soon as you start the engine on the ground and rotate, it starts to lose power because you can't turbocharge a jet engine. So density altitude is very important with a turbine engine. We had a race, one time we took a P Navajo and a Cheyenne to 22,000 feet and did a passing test. Well, the P Navajo ran away from the Cheyenne because it come off the ground at 425 horsepower, but it was turbocharged. So its critical altitude was 18,000 feet. So you had 400 horsepower at 18,000, well, at around 20,000 feet. With the turbine engine, the PT6 runs out of stuff as you get there. So the PT6 starting off at 620 was probably only producing about 350 horsepower. So, well, anyway, that's your lesson on turbines.
Would you be willing to come back, John, and talk some more about?
Absolutely, I don't have a problem with that. I'll do that.
Oh, that would be wonderful. What I'd like to do is, we've gone a long time. I'd like to just, if you're willing, I'd like to just leave this open for a next couple of minutes. There's a few questions I couldn't get to right now. I have a bunch of notes from our conversation the other night that I'm not going to try to get back to that I know people will be interested in. Instead, okay. If it's okay, I'm just going to send them to you so you can fix all my errors. We'll publish them so people can read them if they want. But for those, does anybody want to just jump in? If you're willing, John, would it be okay if people just jumped in with any remaining questions? Or And if not, we'll just wrap this up in about 5 minutes and schedule everything again.
No, I'm good.
Okay, if people want to jump in, we
I'll give you
don't want to
another
go too much.
15. I'll give you another 15 minutes.
Perfect.
Alan Hamblin here from Australia. Can you read me?
Yeah, we got you.
Roger. I started off in a 54 used Comanche, and I upgraded to a 260C in 1970. The reason being that the 250, I had returned from a trip and left it for a service and oil change, and they found metal in the oil. And on inspection, they found the the stub on which an idler gear and the timing train had come loose. The studs that hold the this stub shaft to the block. And I'm just wondering whether that was a common problem, if others have had problem with the 250 Comanches, and do you know anything about it?
Well, unfortunately, I was never inside the Lycoming engines. I went to Lycoming service school, but my job at Piper was installation. So my job was to just hang the engine on that Lycoming gave us. Now, I have experience with an airplane that broke a crankshaft in half, and when you opened the screen, it was, I mean, you couldn't even go through the screen. It had so much steel and aluminum on it. So, but anyway, we thought that airplane had run out of gas, but it didn't run out of gas, broke the crankshaft. So, but that's about my own experience looking at the screens and things. Now, usually what they do too is they cut the filters open. So, but if you're finding parts, if you're going to find metal in the filters and in the screen, you're going to find it early on if there's nothing wrong with the engine, because you're going to always find some microscopic pieces of metal that they never got out of the engine when they manufactured it. But put a couple 100 hours on it and open the filter up, and if you see any metal in it, you got a problem.
I don't know how they found this, but I was amazed when they showed it to me that this stub shaft, it was rocking around, and timing gear must have been, well, I reckon they had a close shave.
Yeah, must have been coming apart. Yeah,
must have been very close. I don't know. It might have been just happened. It might have been running like that for an hour. Who knows?
yeah, that's right. But I don't know. I've had a couple of Lycoming engines apart myself, but only as an observer.
Well, no one else is piping up, so I guess no one else has had a problem.
I don't know. Best thing to do is contact Lycoming.
Yeah, it also sounds like a good question for Steve Ells.
Go ahead.
Yeah, hey, this is Lonnie. One of the most controversial subjects about our Comanches is the horn AD. Do you have any comments or opinions about that?
About the what?
Horn AD.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, I know it's out there, and I've never seen it myself physically to take it apart to see what the problem is. I know Clyde Smith has one, and there's big rivets apparently through it, and he misdrilled it, and he had to go find another one. So.
Oh, probably during his inspection. That's part of the reason, John, I asked you the question. You gave me a very great, interesting answer. I asked you, why would Piper change vendors of a forged aluminum part?
Well, the answer is that is a forging. It comes from a large company that makes forgings, landing gears and everything. And the forging dies themselves are very, very expensive. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 forging dies to make a part. And I suspect that forging die was either worn out or they couldn't get it anymore. So Piper went to another vendor and could not get the forging die that came from the original supplier. So now I don't think Piper was in the business of shopping cheap. You know, I just think they lost their vendor. I don't know.
Sorry, the vendor on the original was Alcoa, and the second vendor was a local company to much closer to Lockhaven for this forged part.
Well, I don't know of any forging companies that are around close to Lockhaven. Maybe Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or someplace.
No, with Kaiser Erie.
Yeah,
Kaiser
okay, there you
Erie.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, it could be up there in Erie. But I don't know. I wasn't in purchasing. I told CJ what we do as in engineering is we make the design of the part and the material and the specification. And then you send it over to purchasing and they have to go find somebody to make it, to either buy it or we make it in shop. And Piper did not have any forging equipment. Originally, those parts would have been machined out of blocks of aluminum. I started out with a big CNC machine and, well, it wouldn't be CNC then, it was some guy in Bridgeport, you know, but they made them. They made all the original forgings for those or components like that in a machine shop in engineering.
Kristen here, you referenced the bird's nest, as you called it, of the fuel selectors in the twin Comanches, of which I'm well familiar.
Okay.
Did, in the PA40, did they come up with a better system?
Yeah, it was completely different. They used a different selector valve. Those selector valves gave Piper a lot of trouble over the years. There was ADs on that, as a matter of fact. The bowl in the bottom of it was porous, and it was I think it was an AD or service bulletin from Piper. You had to replace the bowl on the bottom of it with one that was out of a stamped piece of steel. Originally the one was, I think it was cast aluminum, and it was porous, or it was corroding through, causing a pretty bad fuel leak. And the way that thing works, it's nasty. When you rotate that selector valve in there, there's a thing that goes around the inside and actually pushes a button in that selects the fuel line.
Yeah, well, I know it's cad plated steel, and the design of it traps water.
Right.
Is there any drawings or
no
parts catalogs or anything showing an improved system?
I doubt it, but I think if you wanted to replace it, you could take that cover, you could take the valve out, which is bad, but if you can get the valve out, you might be able to go to a machine shop and have a machine you want out of stainless or something. You would never have that problem.
Do you think, Kristen and John, that we could possibly recreate the improved design and then either STC it or maybe to keep it simpler, 337 it and let us all copy?
Oh man, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen that thing for 35 years. So, but
Kristen, what do you think?
I was the guy. It was on my table when they gave me the selector valves and all the tubing that came out of the original twin Comanche, and they told me to fix it. So we fixed it.
Huh.
Yeah, I've got one I've got two in my airplane and one in the garage in pieces, and they are kind of a nightmare. I've kind of looked into seeing what it would take to get somebody to make that out of stainless steel. Actually, Parker Hannafin, who is the original manufacturer of that valve, did make some out of stainless steel recently on a PMA, but they want $20,000 per valve. Yeah,
I know. Actually, I'm trying to. Parker Hannafin Parker Hannafin bought a bunch of companies, and I can't remember the name of the company that came from, but it was out in Ohio, and they're the ones that made it. There might be a name on the valve.
It's Airborne.
There you go. That's it, Airborne. And they were the ones that designed that valve and sold it to Piper. And then Parker Hannifin went out and bought a whole bunch of these companies. That they bought fuel pump companies, selector valve companies, check valve companies. You can get anything you want from Parker Hannifin now, but they're not the original manufacturer.
Right. And their version of the stainless steel one is you know, two of them is almost worth what a twin Comanche's worth. So I mean, it's
yeah. Well, you know, like you wouldn't have any trouble getting something like that approved as just a maintenance item. But if you get that bottom cap off there and went to a half decent machine shop, you might even get a die, and you could even stamp one, because that's how it's made. They had a couple matching dies in the press, and they just stamped one. But the raw steel one and the aluminum cast one were never any good. We had a lot of trouble with those things. Like you said, with water getting down there that didn't drain out, and we had a lot of trouble.
Kristen and are you thinking what I'm thinking, that there's 2,000, a need for, well, there's 1,000 Comanches, twin Comanches still out there flying?
Well, that could be something that somebody could do. I don't know. That also had another problem, because if you pulled the lever up to drain the fuel, it shut the engine off. So you have to make sure that button was pushed down all the way, because some of them, they would stick a little bit.
Wow.
Yeah, they're not a brilliant design. That's when I check somebody out in a twin Comanche, we have to talk about that.
Well, that's what happens, is because if the drain valve's open and the fuel pump is running, it'll suck air in there. So that's not good.
John, are there any other gotchas that come to mind as when you go over that one?
Well, not really, because I'm really familiar with the fuel system. And I'll tell you one more thing. We started buying stuff from Duke's Astronautics in California. And Duke's provided all the check valves for years. A lot of airplanes you look in, you'll see those kind of red anodized check valves in the fuel system and in the hydraulic system and things like that. Well, for a while there, Duke's had the arrow printed in the wrong direction. And so we'd get an airplane on the production line that we couldn't do the fuel system test. So we had to take the whole doggone thing apart, and then we'd find one of these check valves that the arrow went the wrong way. So we had a saying there at Piper, we called them Duke's flukes, because we'd call Duke's on the phone and they say, "Oh, that must be a fluke." Well, don't you have an inspection system? Anyway. We had a lot of. Now, it never got in the air with that, believe me, because the system wouldn't work. But if you ever do check valves, blow through them to make sure that the air is going through the right way.
I can't even imagine troubleshooting. Kristen, go ahead.
You mentioned Duke's, and that popped up a question. Were you involved at all in the changeover of the landing gear transmission in the Comanches from the Dura to the Dukes?
Yeah.
I mean, that Dukes was, that Dura was sort of a disaster. How did that come about?
Well, I agree, it was a disaster. But we had a rep, an engineering rep that lived right near Lockhaven. And Dukes had that guy in there every day. Bring coffee to everybody and sit around when you were doing these designs, and he'd pull out the catalog and say, "Oh, this is what you need to have. We make this." We actually bought a Dukes pressurization system for the P Navajo. Well, we built about 5 airplanes like that, and they were practically blowing your eardrums out on takeoff. And so we went back and bit the bullet and bought an air research pressurization system, never had any trouble. But if you can get your hands on one of the original little black ones, now Lockhaven Airports rebuilds those things, and they make them like new. The old original landing gear motors.
The Duras.
Yeah,
well,
they're the ones you want.
The Duras are the transmissions, the original transmissions. The Dukes were the replacement transmissions, which were better transmissions. Motors is another matter.
Well, I'll tell you about the transmissions. is they got to brainstorm to the gear, the big, the main gear that's in the transmission there. They decided they were going to make that out of powder metal bronze. And we had them in, we used the same thing in the Navajo flap system. Had a bad accident in Brazil, and the flap motor stripped and caused one flap up. And then we had a system in the airplane that measured split flap, and instead of being able to retract the split flap, it actually blew a circuit breaker. You could not retract the other flap. So the guy flew around for about an hour trying to save himself, and finally bored a hole in the ground. And we got those transmissions back, and we found out that all those Navajos had Duke's transmissions and motors in them, and we had to go to a different company. But if the gear in there is made out of bronze, bad. Anything else ugly you want to know?
I think, oh, go ahead.
I've got Navajos covered. I got a couple thousand hours in Navajos, everything from a 69 to a 83. I love those airplanes. But
yeah, they're a great airplane as long as you don't have split flap.
And that was your line, right, John?
That's right. Oh, well, we had to go to a system. We actually retrofitted a whole lot of airplanes with a system made by Kelco and got rid of the Duke's transmissions. See, the motor in the Navajo is in the middle of the fuselage, and there's cables that run out to the transmission in the flaps. So when the flap transmission blows out, it just strips all the gear and the flap goes into the up position.
That is amazing.
So there's a service bulletin from Piper how to test that.
I've got a question about when they canceled the Comanche line. So I know there was the flood, and the Comanche was, at least what I read, was supposedly difficult to build and expensive to build. But I mean, I wonder what the talk was around shop at that time, and how that actually truly unfolded, if you know.
Well, I don't think that was the case. I mean, they were pounding them out over there, and they didn't seem to have any real gripes about it, hard to build. But see, that was really one of the first riveted fuselages and wings that Piper built. Maybe it built pieces of airplanes, but didn't build a whole airplane that way. And so that's really the first airplane that they made like that. And they were just kind of getting into the fact that they had what they called hydroformers, and they stretched skins over the top of the fuselage. And I know that was a little difficult because the skins would rip open when they tried to stretch them real hard. But that's just something that happened. Now, one thing when they did, after the flood of '72, all the Comanche tooling for single and twin was over there on that production line, and they hired a salvage guy in Lockhaven, and he came down with trucks and backhoes and stuff, and they hauled all the tooling out for that airplane and took it to a local junkyard and used torches and cut it up and set it out in rail cars to get rid of everything.
That is sad.
And they took out all the Super Cub rib machinery, and it went to the junkyard. Yeah, that was the same production line.
That was tragic.
Yeah, so people ask me, are there any tools left for the Cheyenne or the Navajo, or not Navajo, Comanche? I said, no, it's gone. Now, Piper still owns the type certificate for that airplane.
Mm.
So as long as they own the type certificate, they're required to service that airplane. And I told CJ the other night, if you need something, anything, let's say you need a new transmission for the landing gear, you call up Piper Aircraft and ask for the service department and say, I need part number so-and-so. You tell them, they say, okay, let me check. About 2 minutes, they'll come back. Of course, they're going to ask you what airplane's for. And then they'll come back and they'll say, well, we have that part, but it's on back order. And we'll call you when we have it. And what that means is never.
So at that point, are there any regs for old Car 3 airplanes that we can then jump onto to try to make sure we can insure?
No, it's required by law, FAA regulations, that if you own the type certificate for the airplane, you are responsible for what they call continued airworthiness.
Okay, so what can we do to change never to an affordable parts supply?
Well, like you're looking for the thing for the fuel valve, I think you could get one made. Now you can repair the airplane. Actually, people buy serial number plates for a wreck, and then they build another airplane around the serial number plate. So FAA has never come out and said how much of an airplane can you rebuild, but you can always repair the airplane as long as you have a good MP mechanic and you're the owner of the airplane. You can repair it. And if you need to repair your selector valve, do the best you can. Get yourself a good airplane mechanic and tell them your problem. And you find somebody who can make you some new fuel bowls and do it. If you need a new motor for the flap, there's quite a few of those motors around. And there's pieces of transmissions around. Actually, I think that same transmission might be the Navajo flap or cow flap actuator. Not sure.
That's Kristen, did you know about that?
According to Matt, it's not.
Okay.
It's not?
According to the Comanche landing gear guru, it's not. I haven't checked it out myself, but that's what I'm told.
Gotcha.
Well, it looks fairly similar, so I don't know.
Yep.
But maybe the guts out of another one would fit in the guts of that one or something. When you get desperate, that's what you got to do.
Right. This is actually the beginning of a whole new topic. Yeah, I am gonna just note that it is John. I know you would. You've got to be up, and we've had an amazing evening with you. So John agreed to come back and talk about it, a couple of things: the 300 and the PA 40 a little bit. And so we will be in touch with you to schedule that. There was nobody else that could have done this for us. We are so grateful to you for coming and providing your time and your expertise and your memories and your connections. Everybody, pipermuseum.com, right, John?
Yep.
And so there's a donate button on there. There's gift shop that has cool stuff. John, you and I and Roger need to talk about putting a group buy special in so that we can help you and the museum by buying books, because that's an amazing book. So we'll put the word out on that when I've had a chance to talk with your shop manager. But you know, and then everybody wrote and said thank you, and we all want to do a fly-in. So Pete Morse put together a quick walkthrough of the Piper Museum. I don't know if you want to just talk briefly to each slide, or if you'd just like to go to bed and we'll distribute this and ask you to come back and talk to it. But if you've got
put it
moment,
on once. Put it on once. I'm not my bedtime yet.
Okay, great.
That's the building. That's the gift shop. That's the sign that was on top of the factory, or the main factory by the main entrance. It used to be neon and it faced both ways. That's your 400 Comanche.
This is our fly-in.
Oh yeah, that's your little fly-in you had, yeah.
That's one of the guys from Canada.
That's some of the bricks. That's some of the bricks in the hallway.
Yeah.
And here's the Franken Comanche.
Yeah, that's the Franken Comanche.
The Frank Comanche. That is great. Thanks for putting that together, Pete. I'll be putting my notes together, John, from our discussion. And Pete, you want to go ahead and close us out?
Yep.
Okay.
It's about that time. We've been at it for a good while. So I will stop the recording at this point. You can all go look at it on the website.
Yep. And and you'll start the process